All right, we'll get there. They're waiting. Everybody will wait a minute.
Yeah, it's the computer. The computer. Let me make sure I'm on the right. Yep. All right, we're live. Hi. Hello. Good morning.
Hi.
Good afternoon. Good evening. Hi, Dr. Carr.
I'm so glad to see you, Professor Hunter. How are you, my
Uh,
friend?
I'm here. I'm on this side of the earth, which
How about that?
I think that's a good thing.
It's a great
And
thing.
we're going to talk about ancestors. I think that's going to be a common thread. Last.
They're always with us, so it should be a common thread.
All right. I appreciate you so much. I'm grateful for the classes. Let me say hello to everyone all over the world, wherever you are. Thank you for joining us. I think it's our 48th episode, and really, yeah, we're moving along.
My goodness.
Okay, so you start telling us about your thoughts on the great Cicely Tyson.
Well, as we're having our conversation, I was watching the video, part of the video of your conversation during the week. And by the way, welcome back into the classroom. We've added our other layer back, right? So I was captured by how you opened that conversation you had during the week on the radio, with how you asked those young people. Well, you tell me.
Okay, so
tell us.
Right. I don't teach at the HBCU as you do. So the vast majority of my students do not look like me. In fact, if I get one Black American a semester, it's a lot, but it's a lot of kids from, Asian backgrounds, Hispanic backgrounds, from all over the country. Literally, I had a kid from Turkey and a kid from South Korea last semester. So I was just curious, Cicely Tyson had passed, and I wanted to know who knew her. Raise your hand. And I have one Black brother, one young man in the class. He's 22. Not a hand went up. And it struck me, right? Because I was like, of course, everyone knows Cicely Tyson. Everybody.
Come on.
But, 20 years ago, I was on the radio in New York, and I went out into the streets because I used to do these fun things. I would go out in the streets to talk to people, the way Jay Leno used to do.
But before him.
Uh-huh.
He's probably paying attention.
And I asked people, do you know Emmett Till?
Wow.
Just people on the street randomly in New York. And I would say 20-something years ago.
His mother, Mamie, was alive and living in Jersey.
She was, absolutely. And I had actually conversations with her because a friend of mine, Chris Benson, was doing a book with her from Chicago. Yeah, and maybe I would say 2 out of 10 knew who Emmett Till was. So as we convene these classes every Saturday, it's not just about us remembering from the source those of us of the African diaspora, but I think, this classroom is so important because so many people just don't know.
Yeah.
And we assume because we know that everyone knows. Of course, everyone knows X, Y, and Z.
No question.
So I appreciate you even more because it's crazy.
And we all know and should know Anne Frank.
Yes.
This is the function of the curriculum and the textbooks and the school system. One of my Jacob Carruthers, who we'll talk about a little bit later, I'm sure, he wrote once, he said, we're not satisfied with the people who say you should teach your history at home. You should learn your history at home. Our children are in the schools. We pay tax dollars. We pay money for our children to receive an education. The home is not equipped for that. That's the function of the school. So anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to make that distinction. If Emmett Till were taught the way Anne Frank is taught, then everybody would know. And that's not to eliminate Anne Frank. That is to say, let's have this fight, because believe me, this isn't polite conversation. This is what Jacob Carruthers used to call intellectual warfare. This is a fight. Anyway, go ahead.
I didn't want to. I wanted to get off to the races. I was reading somewhere that and there's such a thread woven into these classes, and the ancestors are here because we can talk about something 4 months ago, and there's a thread that comes through to the present. I did not know until today that Cicely Tyson, her first job was with Ebony magazine. And we had this whole conversation about John Johnson. We had a whole lesson on Lerone Bennett and the power of Black media and what John H. Johnson did with his vision for reclaiming and remembering Black people through Ebony and Jet. But Cicely Tyson appeared in Ebony for the first time as a model.
How about that? She was a model. I mean, in addition to being everything else. I love the way that you all packed so much in that little 10 minutes that you posted on YouTube. Y'all haven't seen it. In addition to subscribing to the channel, go back and look at that clip that just went up. Y'all are having that conversation because she entered the public sphere in many ways. As you say, she had to buck her mom. I mean, these are Africans from the African Caribbean, from Nevis. In other words, you know, ain't no Africans coming here to be out there play acting and doing all this stuff, and hardcore Christians, which people might see as a contradiction in some ways. Some of the folks in the African-centered community, in some ways, there are contradictions. However, what is deep in African people is this sense of spirituality, no matter the system you find themselves in. So her mother was dead serious. I mean, so yeah, Cicely Tyson, that was in spite of her mother, but in some ways, probably more in line with her mother's mother. I mean, the ancestors just shoot through you. So I mean, but yeah, she enters public consciousness with the visual. And you know, it's interesting, isn't it, Karen? Isn't it, for our generation, for those who were roughly speaking maybe 2 generations behind Miss Tyson, you know, in addition to the movies, in addition to television, and we'll talk all about all that in passing, and much of that is the stuff that folks can get on their own, which is why, again, I'm so grateful for you for creating this space, because, you know, we get to not fill in the gaps. That's the wrong language. We need to reverse that. We get to bring all that stuff we will see into the framework we need. That's that governance question in our curriculum framework. But, you know, in addition to the movies, in addition to television and all that, a lot of folks knew Cicely Tyson because of exactly what you said. How many times did Cicely Tyson appear on the cover of Jet or Ebony? I mean, she was a constant presence.
Yeah,
she was. And in terms of standards of beauty.
And then you look at her new book, As I Am.
Yes.
Right. And you think about, again, you know, we talked a little bit about Sam Cooke and how he shaped the way Black men were able to wear their hair naturally. And you think about that. Black men weren't wearing their hair naturally until Sam Cooke was like, if y'all don't get that cock and that damn lie and that, what the hell are y'all doing? You know,
bizarre.
Was Cicely Tyson bald, natural, short, teeny weeny afro? You know,
amazing.
Braids.
It's amazing. And wow, I'm glad you mentioned that, because for everyone watching, y'all know that we don't. Well, I started to say we don't rehearse, but we do. We rehearse with our lives. Our lives is what we do. This is what we do. You know,
the truth. 2 minutes before noon, I popped you in because I was running. Yeah. I'm gonna just tell the truth. Yeah, I was running. I did a sauna, and I was like, "Oh, wait, what time is it?" Okay, and I'm like, "Okay, let me just put a head wrap on." And then, all right, you ready? You were like, "I'm ready." So right. I hit the thing, and then we haven't even talked today.
No, nope.
Yesterday or the day.
Nope. No, and we like to those, you know, in terms of our process, we like to, when we start talking in those 2 minutes before Professor Hunter hits live, we always say, wait till you hit live first. We don't even want to talk about what we just come right into it. And in fact, you said something that brought back a memory. Oh my gosh, almost 35 years ago, I guess it was, when you said, "Oh, showtime," and I thought, oh. That in my recesses of my mind, I went back to 18 years old at Tennessee State. First time we marched in my first game against Alabama A&M there in what they call the Hale Stadium in Nashville, the home of Tennessee State University. The Aristocrats was up, and that's what the HBCU bands say before we go out. Showtime. And then we all showtime. We go out just like a team. You said, I said, man, I haven't thought about that in so long. But what we do every day is this work, and our process is very much representative of who we want to be in the world. And I think Ms. Tyson is like that. And last week we were talking about the hammer, Henry Aaron. He had made transition. And we said, well, we'll talk about the 1776 commission and the curriculum stuff this week. And of course, in those days, not only did Ms. Tyson make transition, you mentioned Cloris Leachman, of course, and put her in context. Again, bringing those things into another framework, which is extremely important. And then we have John Chaney. And I'm looking forward today. Everybody, Karen Hunter, among many other things, is a sports journalist. So I can't wait to hear you talk about
I don't have that much, but the connection for you, Temple, I think about you in Philly, and
I knew John Chaney. Yes.
And just, the owl, the Temple owl, and he literally looked like an owl,
Yeah, he did, didn't he? I'm glad
owl, he his shirt sleeves up, and he was so intense, but for Black people enjoying college sports where, until I think it was Kentucky, we couldn't even play college sports, for so many
white college sports.
Right.
Yeah, because we was playing sports like the devil. They didn't want to play us.
Thank you. Because hockey, there's no hockey without Black people in Nova Scotia.
How about that?
Let's say that. All right. So I apologize because we are so conditioned to see things through their lens that it's almost like part of our vernacular to say those things. But I think about, the pride that I had with John Thompson, the pride that I had with John Chaney and watching those brothers, because Black people, we couldn't coach, we couldn't be quarterbacks, we could, and it's still a problem. Sure. It's still a problem in the NFL today with Black men coaching.
Sure. And there is. And let's be very clear. I'm very happy to realize that the white world has recognized yet another of our countless number of wordsmiths in our young sister, Amanda Gorman. But let's be very clear. You didn't unban Colin Kaepernick. So if you think we stupid enough to go with a poet at the Super Bowl as some kind of you racist, you know what? God bless y'all. In fact, what I wrote a little poem. I said, here's a poem for you. Roses are red, violets are blue. Take your fake virtue signaling and unban you know who. In other words, y'all think we that dumb? But anyway, of course you do, because we won't turn it off. But that's a whole. Well, actually, that's part of the conversation with John Chaney. John Chaney, and I didn't know him well, but you could not know him. I came to Philly in 1992 to get my doctorate. And I was there at Temple in school until 98. And of course, I lived there until 2010. Before I moved down here, I was commuting back and forth. John Chaney, I had his students. I had them cats in class. John Chaney reminded me in many ways of a man I did know fairly well, Wilma Rudolph's coach at Tennessee, then A&I, Tennessee State, who was still on the wall when I was there, when we were there, the great Ed Temple. Ed Temple published his memoir around 1980. It's called Only the Pure in Heart Survive. Ed Temple used to run the Tiger Bells at 4 a.m. in the morning. You got to get up. Why? Because after you finish practice, you go to class. That was John Chaney, 5:30 a.m. John Chaney had practice. And parenthetically, because these are two new ancestors, and we're going to blend it all together because we are teachers, and that's part of making the connections. Let's pause here to remember that there was, I think it was 1977, a Wilma biopic. And guess who played Wilma Rudolph's mother?
Cicely Tyson.
Cicely Tyson. No question. In fact, Wilma Rudolph had a child while she was at Tennessee State.
She did.
And I know you know who played her child's father in Wilma.
Hold on. I don't remember.
Yes, you do. Because he's famous as hell now. I might say he's the best actor alive.
What? The best? Come on, don't make me look.
Here's another clue. His wife now was in Wilma as well. She played the character who was Mae Fags, who was one of Wilma Rudolph's teammates, another Olympian. You don't see her a lot in the movies. People think she's just his wife, but she's in fact an actress on her own. There it is. You know who it is. Don't think too hard.
Come on, Doc.
If you said, okay, who's the best actor alive right now? Top five?
I would put Denzel.
Stop right there. You just named him. Okay. Denzel Washington played an 18-year-old.
Denzel. And then there's Denzel.
And
right now.
Denzel, right? No question.
Somebody said Sidney Poitier. Yeah, he hadn't acted in a while. Yeah, it's Denzel Washington. Okay.
Right. And Denzel played Wilma Rudolph's baby's father. Eventually they got married. I think 1963. They had 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. But they had a little girl. And Ed Temple, the track coach at Tennessee State, was like, nobody gets pregnant on my team. And if you can't run for me, I'll make an exception for Wilma, but you can't bring the baby here. You got to break up with the boyfriend. So they had to plot to get the baby away from St. Louis back close to where she grew up, which is close to Nashville, so that she could be with, the baby. I think Yolanda's baby name. But at any rate, that's Cicely Tyson and Denzel Washington in 1977, the Wilma biopic, and her coach.
Can I pause there
No,
for a
no,
second?
of course.
Because, Black people have been stigmatized. Cicely Tyson had a baby at 17, and the mother kicked her out.
Along with millions of others.
That's what, you know, it is a source of shame, or at least it was, especially in our generation. And my father was very strong. His word was bastards. He wouldn't let me play.
No.
I can't go. Oh, that person's a bastard. I was like, but Dad, they ain't had nothing to do with their birth. How you going to blame the child? Like, I would have these discussions with him, but in his mind, we have been so conditioned, as if there's a scarlet letter on us, as if we had choices. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like
that, Hester Prynne. You just put your finger on why we have it. In other words,
it's the opposite, right? Now the pendulum has swung in the other direction, and I think we've overcorrected.
Back in the other direction. I mean, because when did people of African descent start thinking having children at younger than 20 years old was a bad thing? If we had to guess,
is there a?
I mean, in other words,
because they were raping us at young ages.
Hello. In other words, let me make sure I'm looking for. I had to make sure the computer was is it on? Yeah, it's plugged up. I want to make sure it's plugged up because we can't run out of energy.
No, you cannot.
No, we cannot. I just want to make sure we together here. Power down. I said battery is not charging. What does that mean? Okay. Right. Hold on, give me a second. I just want to make sure that everything is plugged in.
Dr. Carr.
Okay, there it is. We're good. So, oh no, this thing is tripping. All right, so we'll get it together. There it is. We're good. So, rape for sure, which is not a metaphor, it's literal. However, we know that we were being brought into this criminal enterprise, this settler colony turned states, as early as the 15th century with the Spanish and Dutch. And this is stuff we can talk about. But then the English come, and this kind of Anglo-centric thing takes over, and so we still obsessed with this 1619 number or whatever. Either way, we're brought into the criminal enterprise as labor. That very quickly congeals into the enslavement system, but we're being brought in so rapidly in so large numbers, not even really what we now call the United States, British North America, or Spanish North America. We're being brought to the Caribbean and to Latin America. Only about 5.5% of the boats that ended up over here from Africa go straight to what becomes the United States. And most of them are in Charleston. Most of them are in New Orleans, port cities like Boston, fewer people, of course. But my point is this. It is only after we enter the 19th century that you see the explosion in what they call the domestic enslavement, because the so-called founding fathers call themselves phasing out the slave trade in 1808. That's one of the pillars of this 1776 commission. They said, well, they mapped into the United States project the end of slavery. That shows you their greatness. And whatever. You take your great grandfathers and all them and go set aside. We'll come back to that. But my point is this. In the half century or so between the formal end of the enslavement by importation, which continued illegally up till, as we know, the Civil War, and the Civil War, the main way you got Africans was reproduction. And they couldn't rape that fast, although some of them, I'm sure, had great rape fantasies that find their way still into American pop culture. But which is why, I'm all good with everybody saying they're children of Cicely Tyson, but I wonder if Cicely Tyson would have played the love interest of a white president snatching her into a broom closet in Scandal. I mean, I don't know. I mean, we can speculate. But my point is this. They couldn't rape fast enough. They used African people to reproduce other African people. So you've got women who, as soon as they're childbearing age, get them pregnant. So, 13, 12, 13, 14 years old, let's pump those babies out, right? Because every baby come out is like cash out of an ATM, which is absurd. So about 1860 and 1861, the bodies of African people, just our bodies in this country called the United States, were worth more than all the real property and all the money in the banks combined. Just the bodies of African people based on what you could get. And if you were a young girl, that's a premium value right there, because you're not buying a young girl, you're buying her and her eggs, and you sticking this brother with her, which is why as we fought our way out of enslavement and came out of enslavement everywhere, in the Western Hemisphere. Two things happen. Number one, in our determination to build community, to not only survive what had happened to us and our ancestors, but to transcend it, we began to pursue the inverse. Wait. Even though the wait was still younger than 20, but here's the thing that really began to invade our minds. These other worldviews, which is why when you said the Scarlet Letter, it made me think of another thing that's in the school curriculum that too many of us had to read in high school or junior high school, the Scarlet Letter. When you're reading Hawthorne, reading about Hester Prynne, oh, it's a sin and a shame. Why? Because the preacher is the lascivious, sneak in your quarters at night, but in the daytime, he's the most pious cat. Sound familiar? Yeah, it's like every damn politician in American history. But the idea is that stigma we inherited about when to get married, when to have children. That thing is heavily influenced by our immersion in these other worldviews.
And it's almost like we are proving to them that we're moral.
That's exactly right.
We have to prove to them that we're clean.
That's exactly
and our existence is through their lens. So the notion of Cicely having a baby out of wedlock.
How about that?
Wilma Rudolph having a baby,
Right. With a man she eventually married. They were not married very long, maybe 7 or 8 years. But the point is, she would have been with him. Coach Temple was like, nah, we can't have no pregnant girls on the team, and you're going to break up with your boyfriend. I mean, it's like,
because you're making us look bad to white people.
How about that? And we make an exception for you because you faster than the wind. And them Negroes turn around and won all the damn gold medals in the Olympics in 1960. I mean, so again, what is the face of ourselves that we teach ourselves to show the world? That's that social structure question. And as we're talking, Karen, again, bringing these ancestors along with us on this weekly journey we have, our process. Y'all hear every week our process, right? We come into the space, and after Cicely Tyson made transition, in fact, we were, Roland Martin does his regular show. We were live when the news came, and then Roland immediately started doing what he does, doing what y'all do. You talk to your people. Next thing you know, here come Danny Glover. Next thing you know, I mean, all kind of people. The next day, he had Janetta Cole and all them come on talking about him, talking about her. And the important thing was in listening to that conversation and being there in that conversation in real time, and then being in this conversation in real time. This is the conversation. In other words, this is the unpoliced space that is open to the world, that really demonstrates who we should always be. We should never be afraid to have these kind of conversations because they're about our humanity, our shared humanity. Danny Glover said something that's very important. He said, Cicely Tyson, she meant something very important to us. And by us, he meant Black people. And then he said, and then through that to the world. So again, this isn't either or. You stand in your full humanity and engage everybody else in their full humanity. But if you stand in your humanity trying to fit whatever you think's going on in somebody else's head, then you're already less than human. It really don't even matter what comes out of your mouth, which is why, the process. Many of us had the same process. I won't say we all do, but in my wildest fantasy, we all would. For me, we know Cicely Tyson made transition. So it's okay. This is Thursday night. So I know we're going to talk about her Saturday. So, and then John Chaney, and you text me just 2 words, John Chaney. I said, yeah. And so, my process is I'm going to sit with that, begin with a text, begin with something. And of course, we know how the New York Times works, and a lot of the white facing media works because they got the resources to do this. And of course, the New York Times obituary crew is legendary. They made a documentary about them a couple of years ago. Very interesting. They start writing obituaries of people they know they're gonna put in the paper years in advance.
Yep.
And then when person died, boom, 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 press, go. The thing that blows my mind, I was looking at clips from Henry Aaron's funeral ritual this past week. And of course, I'm listening to these white folks talk about themselves using Hank Aaron. So Bill Clinton, Henry Aaron never wanted credit for anything except helping me win Georgia in 1992. I said, look at old Bill. Bill been reduced to coming to black people funerals, talk about himself. It's all right, Bill. Y'all want to invite Bill to the cookout? That's fine. He ain't coming to my cookout, but that's cool because y'all don't know too much about Bill Clinton, who did that. Remember that execution he did on the way to running for president? Like, let you know, I'll kill a mentally challenged black man. I can put somebody there. Then Bob Costas comes on and does a little slight dialect conversation. You know, Henry Aaron asked his father, he told his father he wanted to be a pilot. His father said, ain't no black pilot. So look at Bob. Bob real comfortable. You know, Ken Burns got him comfortable in them baseball documentaries. Then he turned around, he said, I want to be a ball player. He said his father said, ain't no black ball players. I'm saying this man, daddy played with Satchel Paige in the pickup leagues and in the local version of the Negro leagues. Come on, Bob. Work with it, Bob. Work with us, Bob. But I understand, Bob, because it's always been about you. I'm saying all that to say that when John Chaney made transition, I think we're going to talk about them too. So I'm sitting with a text. I'm looking at these texts. By that, I mean the real-time obituaries. Oh, and one thing Bob Costa said, I appreciate it because we didn't talk about it last week, and I'm glad he did say this. He said the Atlanta Journal-Constitution had written an obituary for Henry Aaron and had it in their back pocket because of the number of death threats Aaron got. Remember, Aaron hits that 713 home run. In fact, while I was looking for stuff for Cicely Tyson and John Chaney, I came across this. That's that Aaron. That's the first autobiography with Furman Bishop, Aaron by Henry Aaron. This is the one that was published in 1974, and so it goes right up to the last day of the season in 1973. So if you see his statistics there, you see Atlanta. His total career numbers of home runs. His total numbers of home runs is 713. In other words, he ended that season. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution had written an obituary because it wasn't guaranteed Henry Aaron was going to make it through the winter and go to spring training and go play regular games and hit a home run. So, I mean, that's the level of pressure this brother was under, had to live with for months after the end of the 1973 baseball season. So the Times had these, so I'm reading the Times obituaries. You know, I'm a Times subscriber. I mean, in fact, Wesley Morris had a very good piece in today's Times. There's Cicely Tyson right there's Wesley's piece. She kept it together so we didn't fall apart. I know he don't write the headlines, but again, it's all about them. Understand? So, and it's all about us reacting to them. She kept it together so we didn't fall apart. Here's a bulletin, headline writers, when you're writing about black subjects. We don't fall apart. That's why you got a damn country. And it wasn't even our objective to keep you together. So let's be clear. That's just an incidental thing that benefited you. We don't fall apart. Just like, in case you didn't know, black don't crack. So let's be clear. She kept it together so we didn't fall apart. Hey, man, I'm sure I could see Wesley Morris. And why they write that? They wrote that, brother, because it's not your institution. It's always about them. So our relevance is about them, which is nothing you can do anything about. But here's what you can do something about. Don't shape your life so that you're trying to be relevant to them. Don't make yourself a figment of their imagination. They've got that covered. They're going to make you a figment of their imagination. Who is they? I'm talking about what Clyde Taylor called the art culture complex. I'm talking about everywhere from Hollywood to social media to anything that can drill down to the thing that you all talked about last week too on the radio. I was fascinated with, and I'm glad you had the sister on to walk us through this whole thing with Robin Hood and them. Profit. It comes down to profit. So if you want to see when it's going to be a beef, you mess with the money. You mess with the resources. They'll shut you down and make up an excuse later. But the first thing they got to do is stop you nickel and dime Negroes messing around here and taking aim at these hedge funds. That's it. We don't play that with money. And in a minute, I'm talking about how Cicely Tyson, in addition to everything else, and John Chaney represent that third rail, that fault line, that collision course, that battleground, that place for the warfare between the social structure, who we are to other people, and the governance structure, who we are to each other. So the Cicely Tyson thing is to say, I start with a text, reading around, thinking, and then sit there with the text quietly and remember. So for every sentence in obituary, I'm thinking about errors, not errors. It's not errors because it's people, narratives and narratives, but things I would say differently, things people have said differently, things that people you are talking about would say differently. And we picking apart narrative. And then I will follow that memory through to the literature. And of course, still being at a disadvantage until I can get everything out of storage and up. And then that way, these conversations, imagine these conversations with all the resources, because every time I'm thinking about something, I mean, I have obviously the Wilma movie and the book that the movie was based on, little trade paperbacks. Every one of those movies that Cicely Tyson was in, almost all of them, they did a companion book. And so, and sometimes the book precedes the movie, like Ernest Gaines, who just made transition, I think last year before last, the autobiography of Miss Jane Pittman. It's a book first. The great Ernest Gaines, a gathering of old men, the great Louisiana writer, right? Wilma, there's a book to that. Sounder, there's a book to that. All them little trade papers, I can see them in my head, but I can't grab them. But in walking through the texts, it allows us to construct enough of a conversation to get us here. This is when we could start off at the long beginning. Cicely Tyson, and for many people, they may have seen the Oprah masterclass. I guess that was maybe 5-6 years ago, where she talked about cutting her hair. You remember that, Prof?
Yeah.
The story.
Yes.
Talk to us about it.
No, I mean, I don't remember, you know, you please don't put me in this position today.
No, I'm sorry. No, I mean,
let me just be clear. You're the one with the impeccable memory. Between the two of us, listen, your ability to recall things, I think there's your genius. I think there's a gene that allows you to do that. I don't possess that.
I appreciate that.
No, very clear. I'm not even going to pretend. I have to go and search, remember things.
Well, me too. I mean, we do, but I'm saying, but jump in then, put it that way, because I love the conversation, because I know that, and everybody knows that, but in this path that we're making by walking, it's very important to me to always not only honor, because that's important, not only acknowledge, because that's important, but to be with your genius. See, this is the thing about our people. We've been kind of socialized to believe that genius is a singular thing that's rare, when in fact, we're human beings.
Yeah.
So it's you know, in many ways, we think about, I think about a cat like LeBron James. So LeBron James didn't go to college. But if you have the ability to understand basketball, then you understand that this man is a genius. And his genius is applied to a certain craft. But if anybody thinks for a minute that LeBron James couldn't have gone to college and never picked up a basketball and wouldn't be doing some remarkable things, you're not paying attention. And that's for those of us like myself who can watch a game and pick up certain things, but then an expert. In a minute, we're going to talk about John Chaney, and it's going to be like, wow, Temple, I went to Temple. We're going to put Temple in the outside. Temple goes with Bob Costas. Temple goes with, in many ways, Bill Clinton and all them people. Who is John Chaney to them, to the social structure? To understand John Chaney, you got to understand Jacksonville, Florida. You got to understand North Philly. You got to understand Sayre Junior High School. You got to understand where Bill Cosby grew up, the Richard Allen Projects. Only thing people know about the Richard Allen Projects now is that if they watch Fat Albert, that's them projects Fat Albert made a cartoon out of. You got to understand the man that hired him to be the second black coach in the Philadelphia Public High School League. The man was named Marcus Foster, Dr. Marcus Foster. People on the West Coast know him because he was killed by the Symbionese Liberation Army, 1973. He was the first black superintendent of schools in Oakland. He was the superintendent of schools in Oakland when Kamala Harris started going to school, elementary and school across the bridge in Berkeley Unified. So, but Marcus Foster, before that, he was the black principal of Simon Gratz High School, where John Chaney coached for the better part of a decade before he went to Chaney University, the country's first HBCU, where he was the men's coach.
And C. Vivian Stringer was the women's coach.
Which is all I'm trying to do right now. We had this conversation. Now, somebody don't know who C. Vivian Stringer is, Professor Hunter. Would you please help us?
I just, for this, I'm a big picture person, and you understand details in a way that is just, so I put perspective. I say perfection is a process, but genius is a collective, right? And I think for Black people, we have been in a system that has put us in these linear boxes where we can do this, or this.
Yes.
But really what you're saying about LeBron is his basketball prowess speaks to something else that's going on
Yes.
that we don't allow in this construct for him to explore. So he's shut up and dribble.
Right.
Right. With you, singing, playing an instrument, being able to spit rhymes, reading, philosophizing. It's a collective, and I have my own different sets of skills. I like to sit back in the cut and toss it up to the rim and let somebody dunk it, and then come back and maybe diagram the play because
which is a John Chaney thing. Because John Chaney was an All-American, small school All-American at Bethune-Cookman College. He was a guard. He was known for that skill, and he was the coach.
But let's get back to that Cicely Tyson cutting her hair piece, because I don't
remember.
I watched the master class. I don't remember that didn't stand out for me. So different things stand out for different people, and that's the other thing in terms of scholarship. And Michael Harriet alluded to this. He said, when I watch this, there's a rabbit hole that I go down, something you guys bring up, and then I go down that rabbit hole. For everybody listening, there's a different thing that may spark their interest based on who they are, right?
Yes.
So you watch that hair thing. Why did it stick out for you?
Oh, thank you. And this is important again. Roland covered. There was an award ceremony. There's a school there in Jersey.
Oh, the Cicely Tyson School in East Orange, in my hometown. Go ahead.
Talk about that, please. No, because I saw the award ceremony, and Oprah was there. Shonda Rhimes was on stage.
Susan Taylor is, I think, the executive director of it.
Yeah, she came on and talked about that. That's right. But
and it's new for me, because when I was growing up, it didn't exist. We have a Whitney Houston school too, in Dodgetown. I'm not gonna say anything else about that, but yeah, the Cicely Tyson School, amazing, and East Orange as a town, I would love to spend some time in the future, maybe bring on even the executive, who is imagining this town, because it's a tale of two cities in many ways. I grew up in a section of it that was, I would say affluent, for lack of a better word, but across the bridge, there's a whole other world of folk who are living in a different condition. Where the school is on that other side. And it was actually a bridge kind of bringing, all of this amazing art and culture and knowledge to an area of East Orange that didn't really have it. Right.
Wow.
So, it doesn't take but one or two people to change a whole entire trajectory. So, shout out to Susan Taylor from Essence magazine, another Black facing, the face of Essence for so many years, in many ways, the heart and soul of Essence, and then bringing Cicely Tyson to that, because that was really her vision for that. And I've been trying to get in touch with her so she can come on the show to talk about what she did with that. So that's, I'd rather talk with her. I don't want to be the
no.
But I just think, I just want to, tip my hat to what they're
doing. That was good. That's one thing about, I guess Rome must have been burning that phone, because she came on for maybe about 5-10 minutes on Thursday talking about that. And I'm listening with my mouth open. Like, I'm never surprised, but the awe is in the sense of seeing what we do when we are ourselves. The story of that school is remarkable. I mean, Miss Tyson talking about, I didn't want it to be public. And then, I said, I'll be involved on one condition, that you let me be involved with these young people. And then they said, well, we were hoping you would say that. I mean, so she's not just letting her name. And to see all those young people standing behind her. And then she went off into a whole lecture about, don't let anybody call you guy. She's talking to the young girls. You're not a guy. You're a young lady. Guys are born as boys. They are boys. She said, I don't mean to get on my soapbox, but I'm like, look at this whole entire 90s. This is like maybe 2 years ago or not.
Yeah, and this is the thing, a lot of people are shocked because she's been doing interviews. Like, there's an interview, I think the last one she did, it wasn't with Gail, it was with Kelly and Ryan.
Okay, so it wasn't the Gail.
Yeah, that wasn't the last. Right. I mean, it was like a couple of days before she died. So it's like, well, what the heck? She wasn't sick, I don't know why she's not here. But that's the fragility of life. And I think, every day we get up, when we first greeted one another, it's like, yes, I'm on this side of the earth. we have an opportunity every day we get up with breath in our body, activity in our limbs to do something. And this woman lived to her very last days, lived it, was promoting a book to
Amazing.
her very last day. And just an inspiration on so many levels because it wasn't about the Hollywood thing. Because she never made a whole lot of money until, Tyler and Oprah and them came and made it correct. But,
Big up there.
just
No
grinding
question.
it out, just
No question.
grinding, just working because she loved the craft.
No question.
And taking it back to a 17-year-old pregnant, having a baby by herself, kicked out of her house, having to figure it out, and then turned to the arts. Got molested by the guy that she went to school to try to learn how to act. The man, tried to force her to do something, and she broke down into tears with Gail talking about it for the first time in her 96 years on this earth. She cried, well, I guess minus 20, 70 years, didn't cry about it until she brought it back up and then showed up to class, the next class.
Showed up to class.
And you think about, there was no HR that she could go to, nobody she could tell, there was no Me Too hashtag. If it was between her and Mann was his name, Mann, the teacher who also taught Sidney Poitier and Billy D. Williams and Ozzie Davis and Ruby D. He was, that acting coach for those great actors. She said, I came there to get something and I wasn't going to leave without it. So I wasn't going to let that man get in the way of me getting what I came there to get. And I don't know what that was like to live with that, to have to look in his face, knowing what he had done and get what you came there to get.
And you realize you never know the whole story. I mean, there's, the Dogon, and I was introduced to it by one of our great thinkers, still walks the earth, Marimba Ani, who's in Atlanta now. For many years was in Hunter College. Dr. Clark, in fact, got her that job. She was in Black Puerto Rican Studies. Marimba Ani talks about the Dogon having divisions, among others. Dogon people in West Africa, like now the country of Mali, a lot of people, would focus on that country specifically. But, when you say the word, they have different distinctions. There's word from the front. So that would be an interview. That would be Cicely Tyson telling Gail or telling, anyone, this story. That's word from the front. You've heard it from the person. There is then word from the side. That's somebody else who was in the space, who may have observed something or may not have observed something. So an Ozzie Davis, a Ruby D, a Sidney Poitier. I mean, again, and in fact, let me just inject this right now, because these actors we see in those movies and television series in the 60s and 70s, those actors come off the stage when they're Black people. They are trained actors. In fact, there's a number of good pieces. The book that came to mind though was a book that Bert Andrews did. Bert Andrews was a photographer. He began taking photographs of Black theater, and he had tens of thousands of photographs and negatives. And then there was a fire at his apartment in New York and wiped out a great deal, the vast majority of his photos, but so many other places. The Negro Ensemble Company and all the Black repertoire theaters had copies that he was able to reassemble a nice plurality of it. His stuff is at the Schomburg. He's an ancestor now, but they published a book out, selections out of those photographs that the Schomburg has called In the Shadow of the Great White Way on Black theater. Cicely Tyson wrote the introduction, and she's all throughout the book. And so there's word from the side. You look at the pictures, and I'm gonna come back. This story relates to the haircutting story, which we're gonna go refer to this book again in a second. So there's word from the front, that's the person. There's word from the side, it's somebody else. I know there's something, or maybe somebody was confided, but we'll never know because they took that. Ruby D and Cicely Tyson on the other side now. So there's word from behind. Word from behind is the person who heard the testimony, heard the side stuff, convened all the words from the side, and then said, this is what I think based on everything that's been said and everything else I know. And then there's what the Dogon called the clear word. The clear word is the thing itself. And for we can almost never know the thing itself. So when you say that, immediately I think to myself, in what faces us now, whether it be her memoir, which is always great to read. I mean, whether it's a book written about them that they participated in or not, like my man Howard Bryant's book on Henry Aaron, The Last Hero, all the stuff Hank didn't put in his stuff, that Henry didn't put in his stuff, you read that in tandem, right? So I'm sure that somebody's going to write a huge Cicely Tyson biography, not an autobiography, not a memoir. That'll be a word from the side. But the clear word, we'll never know. We'll never know. Those people are ancestors now. And I bring that up because people would think of the Gayle King interview now. And they're going to play that. They'll play clips perhaps from the Oprah interview, Masterclass. And that's putting Cicely Tyson in conversation with this generation now. I mean, Oprah Winfrey, who graduated from Tennessee State, same as I did. Her acting teacher at Tennessee State was my acting teacher, the great W. Dury Cox, who played a role in the movie Wilma with him because it was shot, part of it at Tennessee State. Dury Cox, one of the greats. That's when you're digging in the crates. Now you start talking about Dury Cox, H. Devereaux Brady, Lawrence James, the National Association for Dramatic and Speech Arts. See, the Black theater community in HBCUs, Helen Edmonds' father, who was in Florida A&M. I mean, these people are Owen Dotson and Howard. These people were, they knew each other like they lived in the same house. And it was that network that produced the people who end up on the stage. I mean, so you see a cat like Roscoe Lee Brown or Brock Peters. I named those two because they were in the movie. Actually, it wasn't even a movie. It was a television show back in the late 50s where Ruby Dee played Harriet Tubman. That's before even Cicely Tyson played Harriet Tubman. So when you see Cynthia Erivo, you know, yeah, this is good. Okay, this is the next one in the race. But when we don't connect the dots, we keep starting over again. So the hair story that people may have heard a glimpse of in an interview here or there, or go back to Oprah, I would encourage everybody, particularly if you have access to it in some kind of way, of course, like everything else, Amazon capitalism then found a way to find all these old copies of this show, which is one of the most important shows that Black people produced. There's a good sister, you probably know her. I don't know if you've had her on your platform, Karen, Melissa Hazlett.
I have not.
Melissa Hazlett's good sister, her, was it uncle or grand uncle, was Ellis Hazlett. Ellis Hazlett, the man, producer extraordinaire, born and raised Washington, D.C. But he did a show. They did a show in WNYC, I think it was. And it got, no, maybe it's WNET. Got picked up off of public. It was local television in New York called Soul. SOUL with an exclamation point. This is in the gestation period that would eventually produce a Gil Noble and all that genealogy that leads to a Karen Hunter. And I mean, you know, but it was Soul here in New York. And then, of course, you get Soul Train in Chicago and other shows, local community shows. But these shows, Tony Brown's Black Journal, I mean, this is around the same time. The interview you want to watch is from 1972, the first season of Soul. In fact, there's a very good book called It's Been Beautiful, Soul and Black Power Television. Gail Ward published that back in 2015. Gail Ward is the author. Unbelievable. And Melissa finally, I mean, after years of fundraising and getting, so she showed the trailer at Howard, did about 30-minute piece, and we had a thing. Howard Dotson at the time was there at the Morning Spin Garden. We came together. We with Dotson, Afro Stage. We came together and helped hosted the screener as she's raising money. She finally got it completed a couple of years ago. Look at the documentary Mr. Soul, which is the history of that television show. When y'all see that clip on YouTube of Nikki Giovanni interviewing James Baldwin, that's from that show.
Yes.
All that, you know what I'm saying, that famous, all that's Ellis Hazlett, this genius, Ellis Hazlett, and the people that surrounded him. The first season of Soul was 1972, October 1972. The show opens up with a musical guest. Oh man, this thing was, I mean, they had everybody, Last Poets. I mean, he does an hour interview with Louis Farrakhan in the early 70s, like 73, 74. Ellis Hazlett is an openly gay man having a conversation with Louis Farrakhan about homosexuality in the Black community on live TV. So I mean, it's like exactly this is what happens when we don't take the time to sit with our community and ask who we were to each other. We just pick up the bits and pieces that air in a 30-second piece on Today's Show, or we see something come on. Oh, no, they don't know nothing about us. This is who we are to them. Find out who we are to each other, and you feel a lot better about having standards about how we can apply these to today. So the show opens with a brother whose name many people know. We all know Taj Mahal, the great blues artist. Taj Mahal is very young. Why is he opening that show in October 1972? Because Taj Mahal helped write the score for Sounder.
Oh my God.
And about 20 minutes into the show, Ellis Hazlip says, we want to now welcome to Soul one of the most remarkable actresses. And then he has a long conversation with Cicely Tyson with her hair in them cornrows, that iconic cornrow looking like a Benin bronze come to life. She's sitting there and having a conversation with Ellis Hazlip about Sounder just after Sounder has hit the box offices. And she tells the story, bringing it back to the theater now. She tells the story of how she cut her hair. She says, it's crazy. See, it's one thing to see Cicely Tyson at 95 or 96, yes, or like maybe the day before she makes transition. It's another thing to see her in 1972 when Ellis Hazlip says, so tell me, how does it feel to act in this movie? What does it mean to you? And she says, it's been about 3 years since I've had a chance to do a movie, because I just wouldn't do those roles. She says, this allows me to be my full self. I mean, she's walking through. It's nothing to see. This is the year the movie came out, and he's showing clips. He shows that clip that makes us cry when she runs to Paul Winfield. She's showing the clips where she's with the sharecropper, the white, the guy on the plantation.
Yeah.
How you gonna owe this money and this kind of thing? And then he pauses, and then she walks through the feelings. She tells the story. This is how this is. This is the thing I love about Black people. People sit back and they act like it's such a genius thing to say the Black community is not a monolith. Not a Black community is not a monolith. So Ellis Hazlip is like, oh, and your hair is just gorgeous. And so you can imagine, y'all got to see the interview. Your hair is just it's so beautiful. Tell us about your hair. And then what does it mean for you to wear your natural hair? And then she says, well, and she tells the story of a live television show. There was a TV show. Danny Glover, Roland got in touch with Danny Glover. Danny Glover came on and he started talking about, he remembers Cicely Tyson from a TV show that aired back in the early 60s. And so I went to look the TV show. Damn, she was on a television show. And of course, this is like pre-Julia, because Wesley Morris pairs, Diane Carroll and Cicely Tyson, which he should in some ways, in terms of just that, this is who they are, and you're gonna come to me. I'm not coming to you. And so you just gotta pull that together, right? But there's a show before that show that Danny Glover talked about. This show was called Camera 3. Camera 3 was a live television show that they did that was co-sponsored by SUNY, the educational department of the State University of New York, and WCBS. It was live television. Cicely Tyson was going to play an African woman in the show that was airing that night. She tells Ellis Hazlip this whole story. She goes to the barber because she said, I've been wearing my hair straight. And parenthetically, she says later in the interview, you can wear your hair straight. You can wear your hair now. You do whatever you want. He said, but what you should never do is apologize for who you are as a human being. You do what you want. I mean, this is what it means to be Black in the world. In other words, don't do what you think somebody else wants you to do. Do what you do and make them, So back to the story. She says, I go in the barbershop. I asked the man, cut my hair very low, natural. And she said, the barber, this is a dude, because she's going to do a barbershop. Where's she going to go? Right? Black dude. He's like, oh, you sure? Yeah. She told Ellis Hazlip it took him 3 hours to cut her hair, because he had never done it before. You know what I'm saying? Now, he done shaped up countless men, but this sister comes in. She says she goes to work. They're going to do it live. So she goes to makeup. She goes to costume. She's ready. She comes in with her head wrapped. She says she shows up and says, let's go. It's time to go. Ready to go. She takes the head wrap off. The director looks at her and says, you cut your hair. She said, yes. and they couldn't fire her because they're getting ready to go on. They get ready. It's no time. You know what the man said? This is what Cicely Tyson said. The man said, the director. He said, "I wanted to ask you to do it, but I was afraid." See, this is what happens when you're yourself. You know what I'm saying? This man, I wanted to ask you to do it, but I was afraid. In other words, what prevents us is often what we think other people gonna think. You don't know what them people think. Be yourself. Now you can't get black people off TV with their hair natural.
Come on.
Come on. I mean, because obviously they're making profit. But the reason I bring that up is because the production was called Dark of the Moon, 1957. She says, when we did Dark of the Moon, that was something that led to the TV show that I ended up doing. Right. She said, this is the 1950s. She does chapter 3. Then she does theater, Dark of the Moon. She's going back and forth between theater and television, not yet film. And Ellis Hayes is asking her which one she likes better. She says, well, they're different. You know, it's not better or worse. One, you get instant gratification. Dark of the Moon, 1957. They produced that at the YMCA in Harlem. People have heard us talk about Anna Arnold Hedgeman, who was working at the Y in Harlem for a long time. They did it in the Little Theater. Now, I don't know about you, Karen. I've been to the Little Theater. I went to the Little Theater because that's where John Henry Clark and them used to have their meetings of the Edward Blyden Society, the Harlem History Club back in the 30s. Schomburg and all them, Willis Huggins and all them. And I just wanted to stand in the room. And when I got down there in the Harlem Y, right there on 137th Street, you know, I'm asking about the history. You know, I came up, I just want to know, y'all tell me, because I'm standing, this is where John Henry Clark, they used to put on plays, historical plays. They put on all kind of plays. Come to find out that the Little Theater, that play she was in, Cicely Tyson, was in it. Ossie Davis was in it. Roscoe Lee Brown was in it. A dude that many people know, but not from that far back. Clarence Williams III was in it. All these cats in the movies, on television, they were stage actors. That's one reason their presence was so important. And so about halfway through, finally, in terms of soul, y'all can look this up for yourselves. So you can find the clips. You can actually find the whole show. About halfway through the interview with Cicely Tyson, Ellis Hayes says, we're going to be joined now with the man who wrote the score for Sounder, Taj Mahal. Then Taj Mahal comes and sits down, and they start talking about the cultural importance of sound. It's one thing to talk about it in 2021. It's another thing to talk about it when the movie's in the theaters, and you begin to see the battle. This is the battle in Hollywood. In fact, that sent me, I knew I had a copy somewhere. This is the Freedom Ways special issue called The Black Image in the Mass Media, special issue of Freedom Ways. You can see some of the people who are in there: Eugenia Collier, Ossie Davis, James Haskins, Sheila Hopkins, John Henry Jones, Ernest Kaiserman, Francis Ward. But they have an article in here, Black Women in Film Symposium. Barbara Smith, some of you all know Barbara Smith, the scholar, the intellectual, the culture critic. She's most closely affiliated or associated with Black feminism. I don't use those labels. I just think of them as thinkers. So when people try to say, well, Audre Lorde or Toni K. Bambara, I'm like, yeah, they're thinkers. I mean, people can grapple with language. I ain't got no problem with grappling with language. I find that language in our communities is much more useful when we're thinking about it as who they are to us. I mean, they're because the other thing is, I don't like when people interrupt our conversations with their opinions. You can do that too. But if this is a conversation we're having, I don't see people say, oh, well, you know, the women's movement ain't no solidarity between white women and Black women. This is our conversation. Now, if you want to have that conversation, we can meet at the third rail. We can meet at the battleground between the social structure and the governance structure. And you bring your people, we'll bring our people, and we can have it out. If you want to show me the solidarity right up until the last federal election. And yeah, I'm going to show you where it's not. Now, you know, you find 3 people and say it is, but if every 3 you got, I'm going to show you 3,000 that was on the other side. As John Henry Clark says, somehow blood always calls blood and blood always answers. Ask that crazy QAnon chick in Congress that got Cori Bush and them saying, I'm moving my office because she walking down the halls with no mask threatening us. And see, you don't want to threaten Cori Bush, sis, Marjorie. You don't want to do that. Or maybe you do. Go ahead. Anyway, let me stop. Let me pause. I can hear Jacob Carruthers. Good speech. So, you know what I'm saying? You just keep good speech. Good speech. Got to be good. The Black Woman in Film Symposium. This is a symposium that they had in Massachusetts, Boston University. And by the way, UMass, we'll come back to that UMass in a minute. Remember when John Chaney was going to beat the hell out of John Calipari?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yes,
oh,
I
yeah.
do.
Oh, yeah. We obviously that was a road game. They was at UMass. Marcus Camby and them playing for UMass under Slave Master Calipari. Yeah, I said it, Slave Master, Mr. One and Done. I'm going to tell you who John Chaney was. John Chaney was Mr. Anti-One and Done. You pimp. Still down there at Kentucky, running people through the car wash on your way trying to get a ring, tell them be there for 5 minutes and you for the family. Go to hell. John Chaney, the reason he had them boys up at 5:30 in the morning practicing is because that was a tradition he had from back in the day when he was a junior high school coach, while he was winning most valuable player in the Eastern League, the professional league he played in after he was All-American at Bethune-Cookman, after he was All-City at Philadelphia, Ben Franklin High School. He'd been doing that some time. He was a young boy and they trained him, but he was doing it at Chaney for a decade with Vivian Stringer. This is how they would have practice. I forgot where I was before. I'm coming back to that, but I'm just putting this in with John Chaney. Chaney and Stringer would have practices first thing in the morning, and Vivian Stringer, in fact, go get Vivian Stringer's book. Vivian Stringer did her own memoir. The name of it that come to me in a minute. But in her book, she writes about how Chaney and Stringer
standing tall.
Say again.
Standing tall.
Standing tall. Yes, standing tall. I started saying on a shoestring because that's one thing they used to say each other. Because she left Chaney after playing in the first women's NC2A championship game, and the Final Four was Tennessee, Louisiana Tech, I forget who the third was, and Chaney. What? HBCU? Yeah, little ass HBCU. Yeah, we're gonna beat y'all ass. They lost to LA Tech in the championship game.
Mm-hmm.
You understand? But John Chaney, in his memoir, he did a memoir, and then his players put together a memoir. Bill Cosby wrote the foreword. It's just called Chaney, right? But John Chaney writes about how Vivian Stringer has the finest basketball mind of anyone he ever encountered. He said she's the most creative coach I've ever encountered. And he said black, white, female, male, don't matter. She is the most creative. And so they would switch from day to day coaching the squads that were commingled. And the only thing, Vivian Stringer said, the only thing they didn't do together was hard contact scrimmage. And they were in that little gym at Chaney. And when it was time to split up after they had done everything else together, now they're going to do the hard contact stuff, they put up a curtain so that the boys could practice on one side of the court, the girls could practice on the other side of the court, because they had no resources. And Chaney says Vivian Stringer, at that time, the women's basketball at Chaney, they didn't lose. And Vivian Stringer writes in her book, she says, yeah, and they told us that we're going to be in the NC2A, we have to just take all comers. So we did. She was going to make the jump. Because before that, anybody cared, they didn't care about women's basketball. We're just old enough to remember when it was a half court game and they had something. It's crazy, right? And so, but John Chaney said, I remember one time we did a double header against this team, and I forget the name of the team. That name escapes me, but it was billed as this hype thing. He said the press was there, the stands were packed. The girls would play before the boys, so the women's team would play just before the men's team. Parenthetically, I hate this about HBCUs, including my own. There was a time when women's teams had their own identities. They were not Lady Anything. So at Tennessee State, the men's team was the Tigers. The women's team was the Tiger Gems. That's why the track team's called the Tiger Bells. That's Tiger Sharks. In other words, now copying these white schools, it's the Lady Tigers. What the hell is that? I mean, again, stop following these people. If you understand European culture and Western societies on gender, you wouldn't touch it with a 20-foot pole. But anyway, back to the story. So Chaney says, I'm in the locker room with my boys. Upstairs, the place is packed at Chaney. There's not a seat. The parking lots are full. The media's there. Everybody's cheering. And I tell my young brothers, I say, man, you hear all that? They're here for you. Y'all got to get out there after this game is over and show these people what they came for. So the game ends. He brings his team up. Ain't
everybody left. Everybody left.
Chaney said, what the hell? And Vivian Stringer writes about it in her book. She says, since John Chaney has told this story a million times, I feel comfortable telling it. Because, yeah, that's what happened. They came to Chaney to see Vivian Stringer's teams. And then 1982, John Chaney wins the NAIA championship there. So understand, I know Temple, and of course, then she goes to Iowa, and then remember this, Karen, when that fool who was the president of Rutgers made them crazy comments about, was it 94 or something? That's the year after that. That's when they hired Vivian Stringer,
right? And then Don Imus referred to them as nappy-headed hoes,
and which is the only thing many people in the papers will know. Whenever 100 years from now, Vivian Stringer joins the ancestors, the obituary is going to make sure they put in that clown's comment, right. Nappy-headed hoes. But I bet you $1 to $1 million that all those obituaries, many of them, perhaps even most of them in the white press, will never mention the fact that for a decade, Vivian Stringer and John Chaney were the coaches at championship level Chaney University of Pennsylvania. It's very important to understand. So anyway, I still like to say, when you see Cicely Tyson talking to Ellis Hazlitt in 1972, one of the topics that comes up is the importance of controlling our images and the importance of having institutions that can do it. Sounders important in part because it's Hollywood. Why is that important? Because Black independent filmmakers really don't exist. They do exist, but they're on the margins, and Black theater is fighting. This is August Wilson's thing. We got to have independent Black theater. We got to have Black community theater. And so when we get to, and so like Chaney, and if you read Vivian Stringer, read John Chaney, and what you see is, man, Vivian Stringer talks about the fact that, during winter break, little HBCU, they turn off the heat to save money. They lock up the cafeteria. They don't have a van to go to away games, so they have to commandeer one of the buses on campus that the girls call the prison bus, because one of the places they went to practice was a reform school in Southwest Pennsylvania. And you see, I'm cheap. So in the years I lived in Philly and came to DC in December, I couldn't afford the train pass, couldn't really afford the other time, but I couldn't buy a train pass to come down for 2 weeks to give exams and come back. So I would drive my little car, but I'm cheap. I don't like paying them tolls. It just feel like highway robbery on 95. So I would take Route 1 literally from Baltimore Avenue in Philadelphia all the way to DC. There's a way to do it, right? So you always pass Lincoln and Chaney. You know what I'm saying? Coretta Scott King's sister was on the faculty at Chaney for many years. But at any rate, so when Vivian Stringer tells the story about being in this green campus bus with bad brakes, careening down Route 1 to go to practice with one of her girls' head come out the window when they get up to the train tracks to see if she could hear a whistle. And when she said no whistle, she would gun it to get across because the brakes weren't bad and couldn't be guaranteed that she could stop. I'm saying, wow. And then she said, John Chaney and I would cook for the men's and women's basketball teams on 2 hot plates in a concession stand. And when we had a game, we would pop the popcorn. She said, one time I made some eggs that were green. I don't even know what I mixed on some aluminum plate or something. And the girls was hungry. They ate them eggs. And I'm thinking, this is before some backwater miscreant named Don Imus with his white nationalist, radio network in the vein of everybody from Rush Limbaugh. This is how they built this foolishness that sent these people into the Capitol. This stuff that people take as, yeah, it's all fun and games till somebody decided to put a gun in somebody's face. But at any rate, nappy-headed hoes. You know what you just did? You made yourself famous for being an ass. Why? Because who you talking about? You're not even qualified to open your mouth and take a breath God gave you and project out of your mouth over your vocal cords one word about Vivian Stringer or any of them girls, because when Vivian Stringer has always made it her business to make sure that not only the well-being of her students on the court, but off the court is the most valuable thing. Yes. And John Chaney, you talk to any of them. See, when I was, who was a tutor for the basketball players, girls and boys, women and men, was Adjua. Adjua was in. That's why I first met Adjua. She was a freshman at Temple. She was a tutor. She was a tutor so she know John Chaney well. John Chaney's thing was up at 5:30. We're finished. Then you go to class, and I'm coming around to check on y'all. So I was in grad school when he had Eddie Jones, when he had Aaron McKee, who's now the coach at Temple. All them boys were there, and there was this one young brother named William Cunningham. Everybody called him 6. He was just maybe a half inch shy, 7 feet tall. Quiet. You couldn't get quiet, man. In fact, the problem was this is a guy you recruit, and John Chaney always made it his business. He said, I don't want the diva recruits. But as close as he ever got was Mark Macon. You know, I want those cats that need a break. He says, most of my young men come from households where the father isn't there all the time or isn't there at all. He said, that ain't the point. What they need is a chance and some structure. And when I tell you those young men graduated, and I think about William Cunningham, I had him in class. 6 would turn in a paper. You look at the paper and be like, this boy in the wrong craft. You need to be a poet. In fact, he was a poet. I'm going to tell you who was blown away by his poetry and said, this young man right here has as much or more promise as any student I ever taught. That's my dear friend and good sister, the great elder Sonia Sanchez, who was on faculty in the English department at Temple. His poetry was unbelievable. See, John Chaney's like, you playing basketball, we're going to do this. But let me be very clear. You're here because I'm interested in your manhood. So see, when John Calipari comes snaking his behind up and John Chaney came up that aisle, I'll kill you. I'll kill you. And you see, when you see the clip, you see John Calipari pointing his finger and then do like this. Oh, you want to buck? Nuck if you buck. I'll kill this North Philly right here. John Chaney's coming up to, now he's in Amherst. Dude, you're not even at home. But you know John Chaney coming up the aisle. We can here come the white sports writers. Oh, y'all separate them. John Chaney, near the end of his life, near now, gave an interview a couple years ago. He said, I made one mistake. He said, I apologize. We later became friends. We raised money and stuff like that. He said, but I made one mistake. I shouldn't have said nothing. I should have waited for him after and beat his ass. See, that's what I'm talking. See, that's your friend. Yes, we're all friends. We raise money together. Ha ha ha. That's the social structure. When UMass came for the second game because it's Atlantic 10, they played each other. John Calipari had to have police escort. Why? You in North Philly now, bro. Let me be very clear. This man right here, he's a coach, but he's not a coach. He's a coach the way Henry Aaron was a baseball player. You a pimp. You got these boys out here you're trying to win championships. If they graduate, fine. If not, fine. But you told that boy's mama that if he signed with you, you'll get to the league. See, we know what you about. This man right here, his play, John Chaney's players would have died for him, including, and I'll end with this. A sister who is, my heart to this day. She came as a freshman to Temple. She played women's basketball, 2 guard from Jacksonville, Florida, named Claudrina Harold. Claudrina is from where John Chaney is from. He's from Jacksonville. Claudrina came to Temple. She was all Atlantic 10. She's in the Big 5 Hall of Fame. She's a great 2 guard at Temple. We used to go to women's basketball games. We would go to the women's games. And so after her 3rd year, she had done all her credit. She had done all her work, top scholar. She gave the last year of her athletic scholarship back to Temple and said, I'm going to go off and get a PhD. She got a PhD in history at Notre Dame. She's now the chair of the history department at the University of Virginia, one of the best scholars there is. And if you want to ask about who John Chaney is, you can ask all his men players, but you also ask the women. Ask Claudrina, and you ask everybody else. It's very important. But anyway, go.
No, I was just, as we sew up everything, because for some people, this is kinetic, frenetic. It's all over the place, but it's really not. There's one thread, and it's our humanity.
Yes.
We started off the conversation talking a little bit about Cicely Tyson, and you brought in Wilma Leon. Well, excuse me, Wilma Leon.
My man
Wilma. Yeah, shout out to him. Shout out to him. Wilma Rudolph.
Yes.
And we were talking about both of them having babies out of wedlock and what that means to our, I guess our religion. Is it our religion? Is that so? So I wanted to make a little segue, and I hear echo, but I'll ignore it. I got a DM from somebody who's also an artist, and you might know her from the group Jeanette.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, because she had a question about religion, and I was like, this could be a nice way, because many of us are raised in the church to believe a certain thing about who we are. And when I think about Cicely Tyson at 17 having a baby, and she was a pariah, got kicked out of her family, and we demonize folk. What is that African, and what does that mean to us in terms of moving forward in our spirituality? Because we're still spiritual.
Yes.
But how? So I wanted her to ask her question.
Please.
We're
Please.
going to do Q&A afterwards, but I wanted to bring her in. Let me bring in Miss Jean Baylor, one half of Jeanette, because
that's right.
it's a groove thing, you know, it's a funky
The
thing.
famous, no question. How are you?
A groove thing, you know, because hey, Mr. DJ, you can get it started. You know, you can get it started, you know. Hi,
Hey,
Gene.
I'm
Yourself.
fanboying over here. I hope you don't mind. How are you, sis?
Gene, you gotta unmute yourself so we can hear you. Okay.
Oh,
Yeah, there we go.
You said over
Hey.
your shoulder. That's some of that hardware. I see it. Amen.
Oh, is that a Grammy? I'm sorry. Didn't you just win a
No,
Hi. Did you get a
not
Grammy?
won a Grammy yet. I'm in my studio, so you can
Okay.
see a little bit
That's
of
her husband.
Yes.
Yeah, Mark jazz
Yes.
musician. Okay.
I can't
All
even
right.
believe. First of all, I have to say this is an unbelievable honor for me. Listen, when
For
Karen
me
said you
too.
should come, I was like, no. I don't want
No, seriously. Yeah.
no question. But I have been loving these Saturday sessions with y'all. I mean, the amount of brilliance that is coming over the internet, as we say, is just unparalleled. I love it. And I just be listening. I was painting my bathroom last week and listening to it. And let me tell you, my husband, he didn't want to come down, but he was just amening you so hard on all stuff with basketball because Coach Cheney, because I went to Temple. And I was there when Eddie Jones was there and Dwayne Caldwell.
Yes. We were there the same time.
Are you serious?
Yes, because them boys we talking about the 90s. That's when remember when Kobe Bryant was a young boy. He was over there serving them in the summertime. He would come down from Lower Marion. He's like, this is high school kid. That's before, it wasn't no Leocore Center. We were over McGonigal Hall.
McGonigal Hall. It was
no question.
You had all of Bill Cosby was up on the thing with because I played lacrosse.
Of course.
I was recruited for field hockey, but I ended up playing lacrosse under Coach Tina Sloane Green, who was like and still is extremely passionate about bridging the gap between Black kids and lacrosse. Because where I grew up in South Jersey, in a very white town, but on the Black side, we had sports like field hockey, lacrosse, and golf, and all that. But when you go to Philly, kids was like, "What is that you carrying? What is that?" You know,
will you please help us all understand the fact that there are Black women and men that play lacrosse?
Yes.
And it's usually Jersey or even Baltimore. Like my kids from Baltimore, they say we play. Yep. People don't even know y'all exist.
No, they're like, what is that? Connecticut, Long Island, you have people. But we were definitely in the minority. Like, so on our team at the time, we had the most Black players at one time, and it happened to be one family of sisters. The Thorntons that were out of I forget the township, right out about an hour outside of Philly. But
you know what, you making me really think now. Were you in school with Kobe's sister played volleyball?
I don't know because let me see. I started the fall of '88, and then
that's just before.
Okay.
Yeah, so we overlapped I came in '92, so we overlapped just barely.
Wow.
Yeah. Because when I came, the young people were coming in. It's like Gerald Rawls. Everybody call him Benny Boom now. The film Benny was at.
I knew him as Benny Boom. I didn't know that was his.
Yeah. I mean, he was an alpha man. You know, everybody had different names. But I mean, but this people don't understand. In fact, it's so funny because I went to HBCU, but when I got to Temple, that's when I realized the people outside that orbit, many Black people thought Temple was an HBCU because of how many Black people went to Temple.
Oh, but you come on campus and you're like, is this an HBCU? Like, far from it, but there was so many Black folks on campus.
No question.
So it was a lot going on. It was an amazing time. And so I was cracking up. I'm like, I knew them players. They were Aaron McKee, his nickname was Blue.
Yes. North Philly, no question.
Yes.
You know, it's crazy. People need to understand too. Please help us too. I know we're going to talk about other things too, but I mean, when you mention the name Tina Sloane Green, that is so important. Many people don't know. Could you say a little bit more about her? I mean, what a phenomenon.
She was amazing. So again, I was recruited for field hockey, but I enjoyed lacrosse more. And so I wanted to play that. And the field hockey coach was like, well, you need to go see Sloane Green. So I was like, all right. And so she was familiar because she was also in the recruiting process of checking out players from different high schools in the area. And the high school I went to, we were always in the national championship. Well, yeah, it was called national championship for high school, the Final Four.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. So, and I wasn't even like the best player on the team. I was good, but I wasn't the best player. But we had so many great players. But I met with her and she was like, yeah, let's go. And Tina Sloane Green was amazing because she was very intentional about her recruiting efforts to bridge the gap between Black students, Black athletes, and lacrosse.
Yeah.
She wasn't like hard, but she was interested in us as individuals. Just like when you talk about all the teachers and the coaches like Cheney and
Yes.
the fellow from Georgetown, I don't know all the names.
Well, no, John Thompson. In fact, his new biography, I Came as a Shadow. The brother who helped him with the writing says it was John Thompson talking about John Cheney that led him to study John Cheney. And of course, at Temple, what's the brother's name? The basketball legend in Philadelphia, Sonny. It'll come to me in a minute. Sonny Greer. Anyway, Peter Leocoris was looking for a basketball coach. He asked Sonny Greer, Greer was like, get John Cheney, because Leocoris had seen John Thompson at Georgetown. It was 1982. And so it came full circle because John Thompson looked at John Cheney like, hey man, you the man. And it was because of what Thompson was doing following Cheney that got Cheney the job at Temple. Because the president of Temple, who of course we know, Peter Leocoris, had seen anyway. So yeah, that whole group, not to even talk about the women, but anyway, but we had to get Tina Sloane Green.
I want to watch the time too, because y'all can do this.
Sorry.
Literally. Okay.
Thank you, Green. Sonny Hill, not Sonny Greer, Sonny Hill. But as mentioned, wanted to mention Dr. Green because not only a force in athletics, but an educator, a teacher, an academic, a scholar. Because I mean, wasn't she fencing? That was one of her things too, wasn't it? Like
she was amazing. She was an amazing coach. She really was. And just the advocacy, you always knew that you had somebody that was in your corner, not just because you may bring value to the team, but because you were there. She wanted you. She has a whole organization now called, I think, Women in Sports or Black Women in Sports.
Black Women in Sports. Yes.
And I participated in one of the things where she brings kids from all over in different areas to come. Like I remember the year I participated, there were some students from Newark, and they were just like, "What is this?" And I'm like, "Come on, let's get it." Because it's just the entryway into. My parents couldn't afford to just pay for college. They were going to figure it out because they were of that generation that, by any means necessary, you're going to go to school. But,
change your whole life though.
Change your whole life. Oh yeah.
Just a child coming down seeing you. How many went to college because they saw you? Just because they saw you, you'll never know.
I don't know. She did a 5-year program where she was like, just in case you need additional time for your studies to complete your degree, I'm going to build in a 5-year degree where you can use that. And it worked for me because I didn't pick my major until the 3rd year. And so I used the last 6 semesters to do 8 semesters worth of work, academic work. And listen, we could be here all night long.
Yeah, we could. And we connected now. So we definitely go ahead. What was on your mind?
Okay. So I don't know how much time I was talking about for questions. Because I got a interesting question about jazz, because that's what my husband and I both went to school for.
Course.
And that's a group called the Baylor Project that is jazz. But anyway, I'm going to start with the question that I hit up Karen about. A friend of mine sent me this documented this film that was posted on YouTube. It's not there now, but it is on a website offered for sale. It's called the 1804 movie, The Hidden Truth.
Oh yes.
Of the Haitian Revolution, right?
Yes.
So I told Ken, I was like, I was a horrible history student because all we knew was Black people slaves and white people slaves.
They didn't have too many people at history at Temple even. Wilbur Jenkins, my man, he did, and Betty Collier Thomas, who's a fantastic historian, but she don't teach Caribbean history or world history. So yeah.
Got you. So this is all igniting a profound interest in history for me. So I'm going back and just trying to start from the beginning, from before the Mayflower. I'm like, all right, let me get the basics. Now,
no question.
So I've got a lot of catching up to do. But when I watched this film, there was a section in particular that tripped me out because first, the title, The Hidden Truth of the Hidden Revolution, tells you that whatever was taught was not the real thing. No surprise there. But they were talking about the planning process and the organization process of when the Haitians would go and have private meetings, and they would meet by the swamps because there was all these alligators there, and the Europeans didn't go there. Nobody else went there but them, because the alligators, you would be done. So I'm sitting there watching, so they're like, well, they went there and they did their things, their spiritual things. They had their meetings. They talked about their strategy of how they were going to actually carry this out. But they went to the swamps because they had some kind of connection with spirituality and nature where the alligators did not kill them. So
How
I'm
about
like,
that?
all right. So I said,
Yes.
What is that? So 6 months ago, I watched that and I'm like, what is that? Because I will pay $100 for an exterminator right now for household spiders. So I know that what's the connection that the things that we lost in African spirituality as like I grew up in church, my husband grew up in church, both our fathers were pastors. So there's that whole thing. But it's like, what are some of there's a lot of things I believe we kept, which is why you go have a certain experience in a black church.
No question.
And you just ain't gonna have that experience.
It's no question.
But those things that we lost as well, it's like, what's the connection of spirituality and nature where you are confident of showing up in a swamp with a bunch of alligators? You're like, oh, they good.
How about that?
And thank you. No. Can you hear me? I hope you can hear me.
Yeah,
all right. I just wanted to thank you because I thought it would be a great entry point as we start to honor these ancestors, because even the process of honoring ancestors, we do it in a Eurocentric, Euro-facing manner.
Yes.
Sometimes, but what is the real thing that we used to do to honor our ancestors, and what does it mean to cross over into the next place? So I thought, as we talk about Cicely Tyson, I thought Jean's question was so poignant because I thought it connected all of the dots for us. So I want to thank you and tell the Bella Project, aren't y'all nominated for a Grammy?
Come on now.
A
few Grammys.
Third Grammy.
Big up now.
Thank you. We're in between with jazz, but this one's for R&B song that we just happened to do earlier. This come here and say hi, man.
Yeah, please. Hey, what's up, man? What's going on?
I'm gonna send you both a copy of our next record because it's called Generations, and it is so steeped in. It is. It just came. Like, can I just tell this? Just 60 seconds.
Yes.
Okay.
Don't need to ask no question. She's giving the answer. This is the answer right here. Please go ahead. What's going on?
Well,
come on.
It was about 2 years ago, right? And we had got nominated for 2 Grammys on our first album, The Journey. And we were at our manager's house at the time, right? And it was just a collective Black experience, right? We're talking there and the elders of ours. And so we had 2 couples there, elders, different generations. And we're sitting around the table talking. And the older ones are talking about how when they grew up, they had a refrigerator with a meter on top that if you didn't put enough quarters in the meter, that the meter man would come. We were like, what are you talking about? Why wasn't it plugged into the wall? So they're telling us all this stuff. We're cracking up over breakfast. We had biscuits and everything. And, I got the concept for the next album. It's going to be Generations. And Marcus was like, what does that mean? I said, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out. And as time went on, these things will come. And it's just like
that is unbelievable
mythology of, steeped in Black culture. So anyway, I just wanted to say that, and I would have walked us to say hi.
Yes, such a pleasure, and man, it's such an honor listening to your show.
No, the honor is mine.
And we're sports people, so now we've connected. And
yes,
and thank you all. And we just feel blessed. We're nominated this year for Best Traditional R&B Performance for a song that was literally started as a joke, which went as a viral campaign, and the rest is history. It wasn't even supposed to be a song. And so here it is, and we're
now, see that's genius.
Yeah,
that's genius right there. See, Karen, see that genius.
I love them. Observe
the excellence in that. That's what we talking about right there.
Thank you, thank you guys. So I'm gonna stop out and Prof. Dr. Carr, you gonna answer? Yeah,
we're gonna have a good conversation. Yeah, just thank you. Oh man, I am so very quickly. I mean, to me, and again, just as a point of order in our conversations, as everybody sees, every time somebody comes into the circle, and don't be shy in coming in the circle. Karen, I ran into a sister from Seattle, actually. I went down to see Highly. I rarely leave the house, but I went down there, and this sister named Racine, she said, oh, I would come in and ask a question, but I'm shy. No. Come on in, ask questions, because they're really not questions. As you see, we're having conversations. So, Gene, when you bring that up, first of all, that 1804 documentary, I think it's Tariq Nasheed and them same cats that made Hidden Colors 1, 2, 3, 4, however many of them are now. I think those kind of documentaries, I kind of think of as points of entry. In other words, as you say, they pick our interest to then go out and do our own research and to go past the film into the texts, right? And of course, in a film like that, I mean, you know, my friends James Small, of course, from South Carolina, longtime New Yorker, now Harlemite, was one of, you know, New Malcolm, you know, was a member of the Muslim Mosque Incorporated. And, you know, a lot of those commentators in those films in particular, you know, folks I know, you know, so you have a point of entry. Now, on the question of spirituality and the Haitian Revolution, of course, I'm not a scholar of Haiti. I have a ton of books, the ones that are in English, but most of the stuff is not in English. It's either in Creole or it's in French if it's written, but most of the stuff is not written. It's mouth to ear. I think about one of my former students who's actually come into Howard, joining the history department faculty, Natalie Pierre, who is Haitian herself, raised in Brooklyn, a brilliant scholar who did her dissertation actually on statecraft and the creation of the Haitian state, who is very clear about the role of Vodun, the role of African culture and African spirituality in the Haitian Revolution, and who schools us all on it all the time, in addition to having a couple of machetes at the crib. I mean, that's how she rolls. So really, the question of spirituality, you know, the argument is that there wouldn't have been a Haitian Revolution if it not for the spiritual traditions of African people that blended on that third of the island that was known as Hispaniola. So we're talking about the Fon, the Dahomey, the Yoruba people, sprinkling the Congo people, the blending that creates the Rada and the Petro, the so-called hot and cool sides of Vodun, the ability to tap into the question of spiritual forces, the things you can't see that animate the things you can. There's a small documentary done by the good brother Digimon Honsu. He says, translates, he's from Benin, one who was born in the Vodou shrine. Vodou is really a kind of new extension of African spiritual traditions that comes from very old traditions in Dahomey, among the Fon, in what is now known as Benin and surrounding countries, because those lines are imaginary. And it's anchored in the principle that most of what exists we cannot see, but it animates that which we can see. And so the ability to be in tune with those forces is the thing that allows us to be able to know how to deal with the thing we can see. So the idea, for example, that an animal may not attack, people say that's sorcery, that's magic. And Africans would say, no, that's awareness. We know what is and what isn't. And we know we don't know everything, but we know more than you know, because you separate between the material and the spiritual so rigidly that you can't understand it. Even when you give yourself a system that will allow you to conjure into the unseen. What do I mean by that? When you blend all that stuff together and you're on the island, you outnumber the whites in vast majority, they're constantly worried about a rebellion. So they want, one of the reasons why they try to Christianize Black people is to create a kind of more docile group. Well, it didn't work. And so, but in the Spanish Caribbean and the French Caribbean, you see Catholicism. So what did these Africans do? The spiritual tradition they created in Vodun, they then took the Catholic saints that these Europeans tried to give them and just hid their Loa, as they might call them, or Risha, as the Yoruba might call them, and Netcher, as the ancient Egyptians would call them. In fact, when you look at the ancient Egyptian hieroglyph, their word for divine or God is a picture of a staff with a flag, but the flag is out like this. It isn't drooping. So what that symbol represents, according to the Egyptologists I trust, in terms of students of the Egyptian language, none more important than Theophilo Benga, who's still alive in Congo, and his greatest American apprentice, the master teacher, Mario Hollis Beatty, who's at Howard University. They would argue that when you see that flag like that, that Egyptian symbol for God or for deity or for the creator is not a symbol. Don't be looking at the flag and the stick. The thing they're communicating to you is what that thing is that's allowing that flag to go like that, the air. That's the thing you cannot see. That's the source. And that is really what they're trying to communicate. So whether it be Netcher for the Egyptians, whether it be the Orisha for example, the Yoruba people, or whether it be the Loa for the people who have blended those different traditions into Vodun and Haiti and places like that, they then took those Loa and took them and stuck them, Iruzi, Dambala, all these different names for God and manifestations of God. They then stuck them under the Catholic saints. St. Catherine, St. Patrick. So you see Dambala, for example, Dambala, you say, okay, Dambala can control those snakes. So where do you hide Dambala? Which one of them Catholics he talking about drove? What's that Catholic saint y'all pray to that drove the snakes out of Ireland? What's his name? Okay, that's St. Patrick. So the Europeans think, oh, they're worshiping St. Patrick. Fool, we're giving ourselves permission to control nature the way you want. Now, you didn't name the thing, but you just saying, I'm going to pray to him, and it's going to say, we in touch with it. We don't look at our lower as being so far from us that we got to pray to them. So we don't have to wear the medals you wear around your neck. We ain't got to kiss and then light the candle. No, we'll just keep going in a circle with the right drum, and those lowers will enter us, and we will become them. So for those of you who've ever been to a church and watched Black people get happy, that's the same principle, except the sophisticated African spiritual traditions we created allowed us to name those forces as well. And so perhaps finally, and it's part of the answer, perhaps the most famous ritual at the onset of the Haitian Revolution, this is early on. So you're talking about Macandal, you're talking about, early on, really the late 18th century, before you get to the 19th century. Haitian Revolution, they say history books, it's 1801 to 1804, 1791 to 1804. Yeah, you got to go before that. When you go back almost a century before that, they have a ritual at a place that I'm going to butcher the name, but I'll spell it for you. Boiscaiman, 2 words, Boiscaiman. Or, you need somebody who's Haitian who speaks Creole to give it to you right. But there's a sister there, a mambo, a priestess of Vodun, who helps initiate that ceremony. And there's a famous speech that is given at that time by a dude named Duddy Bookman. And Duddy Bookman gives a speech, and this is an English gloss of the speech. And I first came in contact with it almost 30 years ago, encountering the great Jacob Hudson Carruthers, who wrote a book called The Irritated Genie. Get your hands on The Irritated Genie. He starts with the spirit of the Haitian Revolution, and he says, at that time, Bookman gives the speech. It's called Bookman's Prayer. If you Haitian, you know it. If somebody Haitian, ask them. 9 times out of 10, they probably know the speech. They certainly know of Bookman. In fact, there was a famous band called Bookman Express. But anyway, that's a whole nother story. Bookman gives a speech, and he says, cast down the image of the white man's God, who has brought down your tears for so long, and listen to liberty that lives in all our hearts. That's when they just set off the Haitian Revolution. Because see, here's the thing about Vodun. You can't build no bridge to Western ways of knowing with a way of knowing that is so African that the Europeans are terrified of it. So what do? They can't stop them. So then they try to demonize the spiritual traditions. So probably everybody in this room has been told, mess with that voodoo. Yeah, but you wouldn't be scared of it if you didn't believe it. Negroes won't split poles. You got people who won't eat everybody's red sauce. You go get your hair done, says sweep up that hair and give it to me. I got to burn it or flush it down the toilet. What's that? That's superstition. Nah, it's recognition that there are forces beyond the forces you can see. And it's okay. It is really okay to embrace those forces. Don't be scared. Because if any of y'all usher like I did, when people start getting happy, you ain't scared of that. You know the difference between that and Vodun spirit possession? Some names and a couple of socialization. But the thing they couldn't beat out of us, that's the thing that keeps us going. That's what the civil rights movement was based on. Spiritual traditions. We are soldiers in the army. We got to fight. Sometimes we had to cry. We had to hold up the bloodstained banner. We got to hold it up until we die. They just glossed we are soldiers in the army, which they also glossed in HBCU marching bands. We got to march until we have. In other words, it's the notion of doing something as one entity. Individuals can have success, but when you are one entity and you're tapped into that spiritual force, hell, I'm not surprised that an alligator would lay down. Because some of y'all been in some of them rituals where you saw some things, and as Nation of Islam used to say, those that say don't know and those that know don't say. So I'm gonna leave it at that, because even though this is intimate space, it's all exactly. You don't leave it at that. Because I know I done seen some stuff. I'm sure you had too.
Yeah, and again, we know, we believe, we know what we know, and yet at the same time, we don't use that force to do the things we need to do.
Well, we don't give ourselves full permission. And Jean, I see she put in the chat, remind the Daniels in the Lions Den. That's important. If you read Michael Gomez's book, Exchanging Our Country Marks, he goes by different national groups, chapter by chapter. And when he starts talking about the Igbo, and he starts talking about how Africans began to embrace Christianity in places like South Carolina, he says one of the reasons they would embrace Christianity They wouldn't embrace Christianity by going to the European interpretation. They would embrace Christianity by taking the pieces of that Europe narrated and bringing it to them. So they would say, Jesus Christ. Wait a minute, hold on. He died and come back to life? Okay, we do that. Yeah. Well, he had control over the spirit. Yeah, we can. Okay. So they started bringing it into themselves. And when you mentioned Daniel in the lion's den, you know, black folk be Old Testament people. The politics in the Old Testament is one of the things that attracted black people in those spiritual traditions. Daniel, unharmed in the lion's den. Why? He's protected by the force, by the creator outside. And you know the Negroes love Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They in the fiery furnace. They put them in the furnace, it was 3. They opened it up, it was 4. And 1 looked like the Son of God. In other words, black people said, okay, yeah, we can get with that. See, y'all the ones that got Frankenstein and Dracula and the Wolf Man and all. Y'all scared as hell of old folks. You scared of dead people. You don't go to the graveyard. We go to the graveyard. Because most human beings go to where their ancestors are buried. That's why people love Coco, that Disney movie, so much. Yeah, those people, see those people there, those Native Americans, those First Nations people you call Mexicans, those people understand your people are with you. Y'all understand it too, but for the rest of the world, because you got Arlington National Cemetery, you got you got forget the name of the place in London where all their people are buried, but it'll come to me in a minute. But for other people, you want to act like they somehow are alien. That is intellectual warfare, because you have to reduce those people's humanity in order to convince yourself that you're supposed to rule over them. The Africans wouldn't take it. And so, Karen, I think when we are comfortable tapping into our cultural foundations for political purposes, we've seen the world change. All anybody has to do is watch any of those civil rights documentaries. And you see them black people, you see those old ladies, you see those children singing and getting that pitch. Go talk to our dear sister, Bernice Johnson Reagan out of Albany, Georgia, Sweet Honey in the Rock, which came out of the Harambe singers, which came out of the SNCC singers. Go listen to those sisters and brothers talk about how they tapped into the spirit. See, you can use your spirituality as a weapon. I'll leave it at the Haitian Revolution is probably the best example of that, which is why Jacob Carruthers talks about it. And I think we are scared. Karen, we're scared in a sense because, and I want to just mention one other thing in terms of Cicely Tyson to tie off a little bit of a loop. When we do not act collectively, we rob ourselves individually of access to that collective power. When I mentioned the Freedom Ways piece, for example, in 1974, the Readers Forum Black Women in Film Symposium that Barbara Smith writes about, there were 4 women invited to this conversation, 4 actresses: Susan Baston, Cynthia Belgrave, Ruby D, 5 actually, Ruby D, of course, Bea Richards, and Cicely Tyson. Cicely Tyson is in here talking about the fact that when they offer black women roles at all, and there aren't many roles, obviously, in white-facing media at the time, and even the ones in black, so-called black, what they call black exploitation media, it's a whole conversation. Mario Van Peebles was on with Roland the other night talking about, you know, Sweetback in 71 and trying to get stuff done independently, and how Hollywood doesn't develop the black characters, and why Cicely Tyson's choices were so important. But Cicely Tyson here writes and talks about the idea of how, and she says this in the Ellis Hates It interview too. She said, I took a role in Sounder that allowed me to appear on the screen as a human being rather than as a black doll or a sex symbol or an addict. All the things we've been forced to deal with in the past few years. Now, what does that have to do with Vodun? Let me tie this together. In this series of interviews, they talk about the fact that Western society in its patriarchy has a fascination with sex that's about objectification. And when it comes to women, they objectify with this hypersexuality. So when you see a black woman who they cast in these movies, they're sex symbols or they're objects of desire, this kind of thing. And in fact, what they say, what these sisters say in this conversation is, when you see a black woman appear who is not one of those things, it's the equivalent of being a female impersonator. Because female does not mean, woman rather, does not mean black. So we see a black woman not being one of those things, they don't know what to do with her. Are you impersonating a woman? No, we need to see some skin, or we need to see somebody, you punch somebody in the face or cuss somebody out. We need to see you cackling all the time and laughing. And so when I see 2021 pop culture, Hollywood pop culture, it's like, Are we in 2021 or are we in 1974? In other words, or 1874, the minstrel show, or 1920, the early, in other words, are we replicating these stereotypes? Now, what prevents you from having to do that is if you have an institutional base, if you have a collective base. And of these people in the interview, finally, Bea Richards, look her up, Beah Richards. Oh man, when you tug on Bea Richards, she gonna take you back to the 1930s, 40s, 50s. Lisa Gay Hamilton, for example, the actress, participated in a very important documentary on Bea Richards. You talking about a contemporary of Paul Robeson, Ossie Davis, and Ruby Dee. And she says at this stage in her career, remember, she said, I was getting into debates and arguments on the set of Guess Who's Coming to Dinner with Spencer Tracy, because remember, she was in Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. But that's what white-facing media would know her for. She's got a huge history in the Black theater, Black film. She says, at this stage in my career, I would much rather just make independent community theater. Because if you only have a dime to make a film, better you use that dime and make a film. Are people going to see? I hear the voice of my dear friend and elder, the great Haile Garima, and his wife Shrikiana Garima, who have never gone to Hollywood to make film, but who produced so many people who have gone out and done incredible work, from Arthur Jafa, to my man, what's Brad's last name? I'm thinking about him now. It'll come to me in a minute. But all these filmmakers, they won't go because they said, we got to tell our stories. Bea Richards, sitting next to Cicely Tyson, who has said, I will be one of the ones who break into that space, but I'm coming to represent us, and I'm coming from us, meaning I'm going to keep my spirituality, keep my community. Bea Richards is like, yeah, and I'm all for you, sis. And I'm just going to stay with the community and do my craft there, because, it's not in my spirit to do that work that you're doing in the way that you're doing it now. That all ties to the Haitian Revolution in this way. When we live and connect our spiritual traditions out of our traditions without apology. Now we can debate, the nature of those traditions, what's good, what isn't good, whether it be Nollywood coming out of Nigeria or every Tyler Perry movie he had ever made, which is one of the reasons I think probably Cicely Tyson messed with Tyler Perry. If you tie in, you're going to see God somewhere in it. I don't care if it's a 10-minute Nollywood movie. If 4 of them ain't devoted to some form of God, and if you see a Tyler Perry movie, at some point Jesus showing up. In other words, it's going to be tapped into that spirit force, and guess who responds to that? It ain't going to be the movie critics necessarily. It ain't going to be the people in the Academy for Motion Picture Arts. It's going to be the people, because we never left our spiritual traditions. It's the fuel that allows us to make it day by day. And when we bind together, it's the fuel that allows us to transform whatever society we find ourselves in. We just don't need to be scared of it. Now I do believe we should start. Well, this is just editorial. I'm just going to say this. No, I won't say it. I'll let the ancestor speak. John Henry Clark said, I will know that African countries are one step closer to true liberation when an African head of state prays to an African God in public. I just stopped there.
Oh, okay. There are so many people right now who are shunning God because of how God shows up, without understanding that we show up in God, not the other way around.
Right.
White people did not bring God to us. We're not praying. You are praying to a white Jesus, then that's something you gotta.
In fact, Christianity was an African export. Christianity. Oh, Brad Young. But Christianity there's no Christianity in Europe. Christianity came out of Africa. Christianity was around for centuries before Constantine and them realized they can't stop it. And in 332 or so, called the Council at Nicaea, followed by the other ecumenical councils. Theodosius closes down the schools in Egypt. That's later. We gave them Christianity, and they turned around and tried to make it white and gave it to us and hope we had amnesia. Then we took it and blacked it up again. We blacking it up now. These children, boy, running around in the world house, as Dr. King might say, chapter 6 of Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community, the world house. You let your children run around in the house without supervision, they'll tear up the world. You better go talk to these children. Stop acting like they're the parents. I should leave that right there.
You better stop.
Because if you don't understand, you might be like John Chaney coming up that aisle. I'll kill it. My man, I should stop. I love John Chaney. I'm gonna tell you right. You would see John Chaney in the market. You would see John Chaney in the little restaurants. John Chaney was beloved in Philadelphia, and it wasn't because of all the games he won at Temple. It's because when you saw John Chaney, you saw somebody that changed young people's lives. And when you heard Gene say that, I can't say enough about Dr. Tina Sloane Green and the Black women and men who were at Temple on faculty and staff. And so, you know, when you can you imagine, Karen, bring a child from Newark, she sees somebody like Gene, say you play, and I was fortunate enough to see it at Howard, because Howard at one time, now Title IX, it had messed up the game. They had women's field hockey, and you would see those. That's one thing, and maybe we talk about this another time. The HBCU tours, that's a uniquely Black invention, like the family reunion. Those HBCU tours where you see children who had never been on a college campus, and they get on a bus in New York or Orange or Trenton or Philly or Baltimore, and then they drive straight to Atlanta, and then they work their way back up. And by the time they get back home, they have been on these campuses with these people who look just like them, who are no different than them, who are from their hometowns, and they say, I want to go to Clark, Atlanta. I want to go to North Carolina A&T. I want to go to Norfolk State. Oh, I should say this, 30 seconds, real quick. When Vivian Stringer took her team to the first NCAA championships, to the Final Four, and they were in the last game, I think Maryland was the fourth team in the Final Four. When they went to play Louisiana Tech, they were in Virginia. Chaney couldn't afford to send the band. So guess what? Norfolk State. Some of y'all Norfolk graduates says, what do y'all say at Norfolk State? Behold, the green and gold. Well, that weekend, it was not green and gold. The Norfolk State team, the Norfolk State University, sent their band to represent Chaney, because Chaney needed a band because everybody else had their band there. And see, that's what collective looked like. That's what it looked like. Y'all don't know nothing about it. This is when we went. Norfolk said, we got you, sis. Norfolk sent their band. And Norfolk band for that game was Chaney's band. Very, very, very important. Anyway.
And, you know, as you're talking about that, you know, this week there was this, this stock market thing that happened with, you know, GameStop and AMC, and folk lost their minds. But what I came out of it with, you know, we did have a discussion about it from a financial standpoint, was this is what it looks like when people come together around a common cause. And it ain't hard.
It's not hard.
And we've been doing it. So I'm not, you know, wagging my finger saying, why don't Black people do that? Black people do that. We do that all the time.
Well, that's a good thing, Karen, for us having these conversations, right? Because what we're doing is just coming up with a few examples of how we did it. Imagine that. John Chaney, Vivian Stringer, both in the Naismith Hall of Fame, at a HBCU where they turn the heat off between the semesters, cooking for the whole men's and women's basketball team on 2 hot plates in the concession stand in a gym they got to damn near break into to practice. That's not speculation. You know what I'm saying? I mean, so what does that mean? We got to do better. And what does it mean? That's with a shoestring. That's why I was thinking it wasn't standing tall. I thought because they used to say to each other, we do this on a shoestring. And then when she went to Iowa, I forget what was the press conference when she went to Iowa or Rutgers, where she was like, now I get, you know, to cook with all kind of shoestring potatoes, but I'm used to a shoestring. As Jesse Jackson said, first time I saw Jesse in 1984, when we were working on Jackson campaign, he came to Nashville. He was at Vanderbilt, standing room only. And we all there. And he got up in front of that white crowd. He said, you know what? If they had my budget, they could not compete. If I had their budget, they could not compete. And everybody just started.
That's true. It's true. I mean, you think about even here. I didn't know that Jean went to Temple.
How about you didn't?
And no, she, you know, she's been on my show. She and her husband, you know, of course, I grew up listening to Janae. Janae is amazing, you know.
No question about it.
So I was geeking out when they reached out. I was like, we got an album. I was like, Janae knows me, you know, like Jean Baylor knows me, you know. And her husband, they're just the most lovely couple too. It's a pleasure to be around them. They're hilarious. So when she hit me in the DMs, was like, I got a question for Dr. Carr. I was like, you're listening on Saturday?
I didn't know. Fanning too. I'm like, what are you serious?
Yeah, what is happening? And so I just was like, come on in, ask it live. She was like, I don't know. I was like, like, come on, ask it live. And then I'm like, what are the odds that she went to Temple and you were there around the same time?
Yep. Well, you know the odds. In fact, the question she asked, the observation she made, you're the living proof of it. Y'all, we don't plan this. This is the answer. This is the thing we can't see. You know what they're doing right now? They saying we approve. Every time that happens, they like, we approve. Here's some more incentive.
I'm about to drop something else. So we're not supposed to talk about 1776 today. So everyone that did the homework.
Oh, yes.
We ain't got time.
We should at least mention this though. Maybe add this for next week. We're gonna because today's the 30th, right?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is the 30th of January.
Carr G. Woodson. That's why he started Black History Week, become Black History Month. We know that this a year ago to this day, I was in Chicago at the Center for Inner City Studies with our friend, now an ancestor, Conrad Worrell. It was one of the last times he was in public having a conversation. We did Black History Month kickoff, the 30th. And so shout out to my beloved family in Chicago, to the new ancestor, Conrad Worrell. But if you get a chance, in fact, those of you who want to get a nice piece, get to your young people, here's Jacob Carruthers. We were at the Jacob H. Carruthers Center for Inner City Studies. I've showed y'all this book a couple of times, Intellectual Warfare. Arthur Schlesinger in 1991 did a whole hit piece on the African-centered movement called The Disuniting of America. We talked about that. I ain't saying by that. See if you can find a PDF somewhere online. But Dr. Carruthers, and it was Mama Ife Carruthers, Dr. Carruthers' widow, who reminded me, and I pulled it off the shelf, chapter 9, Neo-Hegelian Multiculturalism, a critique of Arthur Schlesinger Jr.'s The Disuniting of America. You want to read that in advance, because between the 90s and the curriculum wars, the 80s and 90s, and now, like everybody's giving, what's her name? Cheney? Liz, is it? Liz. Yeah. They're giving her all this credit. Oh, she stood up. Yeah. Go check Liz Cheney mama up. Lynn Cheney was over the National Endowment of the Arts, and she came out against the standard curriculum that had been floated, national standardized curriculum, because she said, y'all mentioned Harriet Tubman in here 6 times and the Gettysburg Address only once. What the hell is going on? Arthur Schlesinger came out and said, I think the far right is wrong. I think the far left is wrong. I'm against the multiculturalists, those Afrocentrists in particular. And he started naming names like a hit list. And he said, I'm also against these ultra white nationalists. He tried to make them the same thing. The 1776 Project. Yeah, we're going to spend some time on that. Read some of the critiques that took place in the curriculum wars. We're going to put all that in context, but you're right. We won't be able to get into today, but I just want to drop a couple more sources in case folk want to.
The ancestors wanted us to do this.
Yes, they did.
Just briefly, how did Africans honor folk who had passed? Because I think, a lot of times we grieve, we miss the people that are here. But I feel like we grieve in a very Eurocentric way as well. Mm-hmm. Can you give just a little bit of how Africans, and I know that's broad because
sure,
we weren't monolithic in Africa or whatever that country was called.
Yes.
The continent, the whole entire continent.
Right.
But what are some threads or some tenets that we can borrow or remember?
Oh, that's good. That's good. I would say this very quickly, and you're right. There's no one Africa, but there are many commonalities. One is intimacy. Think about Maladimo Some, but intimacy. What does that mean? When a person makes transition, it doesn't break the intimacy, and the death ritual kind of cements the intimacy going forward. So it wasn't uncommon to wash the body, to sit with the body. It isn't just Jews sitting Sheba. Let's be clear. And, don't get too cute about it, but in some ways you could see Judaism as an African export too, depending on how you want to read it. But at any rate, there's an intimacy with the physical remains. You sit with the remains, you dress the person. I mean, burial rituals are very important, which leads me to the next thing. It's always important. Well, not always, but oftentimes it's important where you place your ancestors. And Black folk get real particular about where they want to be buried. Now we got more people. I want to be cremated. I want to be, but no, I want to go with my mother. I want to go with my family. But you were married to Pop for but I want to go with my, no, because this is the place to which the third piece comes. You return. We have to always honor And see, because what we're doing by doing that, we're not keeping them physically alive, we're keeping their spirits with us, and that allows us to call on them. So for example, today, when we leave here in a few minutes, I'm going to switch over the Banneker Woodson divisions of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League of the World. Marcus Garvey, Amy Jakes Garvey, Amy Ashwood Garvey, that organization, the UNIA and ACL, are having their 40-day ritual for the transition of Marcus Garvey Jr., the oldest son. Marcus, Julius Garvey, of course, still alive, doctor there in New York. Marcus Garvey Jr. made transition in December. This is the 40-day ritual. They're doing the 40-day ritual today. And I'll be participating along with some other folks. Willie Wilson, of course, the famous pastor here in DC. Matsamela, Mark Thompson is going to be the MC. So in some traditions, it might be 60 days, it may be 50, it may be 40, it may be 30. But after the person makes transition, you then regather because the death ritual is heavy. It's the prayer, because a lot of traditions will believe at the moment you make transition, you start your journey into the next phase of existence. It isn't instantaneous. So then what you do is after somebody makes a transition, you begin to pray. You call their names, you evoke them, you light candles. Why? Because they're now journeying, and you gotta keep that bond with them strong because they're joining now eternity. They're going back into eternity. After a certain moment, you mark the idea that they're there now. They're the young ancestor. And so then you have a celebration. In other words, it allows us to pair and to give the grief voice and then come back in a moment and join the celebration. They've made it. And then after that, when you pour libation and call their name, that's why I'm very particular about it. We do libations since George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and so many, Ahmaud Arbery and some of them have died. If they're not blood ancestors, you call their names. Why? Because they will fight for us and they will fight for themselves. And so that gives us the sense that Cicely Tyson went the way we're all going to go. What a blessing to get 96.
Come on.
If you take them two numbers and switch them around the other way, I don't know. I'm guaranteed to get to 69. So 96. And then, but she's going to make transition. So when this moment we're sad, we're heavy, what we do has been incredibly helpful. I know to me and to you in our conversations, given this ritual, and then they fight for us. They absolutely fight for us, but Breonna Taylor, she's an ancestor too young, but that don't mean she don't fight for us. So guess what? Somebody might say, well, Mitch McConnell, she didn't win no election in Kentucky. No, but Georgia made Mitch McConnell the minority leader. Some people gonna say, yeah, Breonna Taylor was in that. She's so disgusted at Daniel Cameron that she wrecked his chance to be on the Supreme Court ever. Ha ha, young Dan, you think the power's on this side, bruh. This is this is the pinhole. Where we live, with our living moment now, this is like a little pinhole. The most of it you can't see. And she over there now. So you can't do nothing about it, bruh, except get your mind right and try to come on back to the home team, because otherwise you're just gonna be taking L's the rest of your life.
As he should.
Yep, until he change. Everybody can change, but you know, they come crying at the end of their life, wanting forgiveness.
Yeah, this brother.
Hey,
you mentioned a cemetery in London.
Oh,
how the ancestors worked. Again, I don't know the folk who are coming in. They DM me, and here is Daryl, or is it Darrell from London? Daryl from London. Yeah. Welcome. And he probably knows that cemetery that we couldn't think about.
Yeah,
no, this is it was Africans.
So there's a mass grave in a place called Blackheath, which is in southeast London. There's a place in Clapham Common where there's a mass grave for Africans that are there, but also for Europeans or British people at the time. And there's another grave site. It's just on the outskirts of southeast London. There's another place where Africans are buried. But essentially, these mass graves where these Africans are, especially the ones that are mixed with British people, they've turned it into parks. So now they can't build on top of it. So this is a mass area where it's just greenery upon greenery. Because of the amount of people that have been buried in these areas, they can't build on top of it. So it's just literally greenery. But it's only until you read the small plaques as you enter into these spaces that you see about the history. But otherwise, people just think it's a park and, you know, they have fun fairs and stuff like that there. But essentially they have these masquerades, but no one really knows about it unless unless you're researching it.
Do y'all do rituals, like rituals of remembrance? Or there anything you do around the places, like Black Heat?
Yeah, well, some people do, because here, which is kind of tied into the question which I had for you anyway, was there's a few people that do rituals, but not really. These are people who are been part of the Pan-African movement. So you've got RBI here, right? And they are the ones.
Your folks Jamaican, man?
So my family's from Jamaica and Barbados, but
are y'all part of are they part of the Windrush generation?
Yeah, well, this is what I'm about to talk to you about.
Please talk to us, man. Let everybody know what that is.
Okay, so so thank you for first and foremost. Like, listen, I'm telling you, like week in, week out, this is an honor, honestly.
The honor is mine, brother. I really do mean that, brother. This is, and thank you, because you showing us we worldwide, man.
I had a question, Daryl, because I'm just meeting you. You watch us in London?
Oh yeah, 100%.
So how did you find the class?
So I was I would say because Karen, I've been watching you for years, for time.
There you go.
I've my first kind of like real introduction to both of you is the first interview you did with Dr. Carr. So when we speak about Africana studies, and he's talking about ways of knowing, because I'm a teacher myself, I'm a historian. So I do Black History tours in central London where we look at the colonial history between Britain and the Caribbean. So what I've got to do now is I've implemented that in something called Saturday School. Saturday schooling is a supplementary way of alternative learning in Britain. So in the 1960s, because of the matter of fact, let me stop. So there's a period in time just after World War II, 1948 was a period of time where there was a journey that was made from the Caribbean of a certain section of people who wanted to help develop Britain. So after World War II, Germany literally destroyed a lot of London, a lot of the UK. However, with the population in Britain, there wasn't enough people here to sort of remend and repair Britain back to how it was. So what they did, they created this call out to the Caribbean, but it was the new Commonwealth. So the old Commonwealth was all the areas that Britain colonized. And then it was the early 1930s when they created the new Commonwealth, where they got rid of the areas that were white. So they got rid of Canada, they got rid of South Africa, they got rid of Australia, they got rid of New Zealand, but they kept the Caribbean, they kept most parts of Africa, and they kept southern part of Asia. So all the places that were non-white, they kept in the Commonwealth, which is still owned by the Queen.
So the 30s, that's about the time when your man's your homie Cecilia James came to England. I know Carl Robeson played Toussaint in
Exactly, right? So obviously this is George Padmore time as well. He was
Ras McConan, all them cats.
Exactly, right? So
this is great.
So when the war ended in 1945, Britain was awarded a ship. It was actually a German ship called Monte Rosa, Monte Rosa. It was a German ship. So they was given that, and then they developed the name Empire Windrush. So the ship is actually called Empire Windrush, but it's actually a German ship. So they had this call out to the Caribbean, like, please help us build back the nation. So Caribbean people at the time, they saw themselves as British. So even though you had like Jamaica, Barbados, and so on and so forth, they were still British subjects in the eyes of Britain. So they was like, okay, Britain's the mother country. Let's just go out there and help. So they came over here in 1948. But what the plan was that he wanted people to help build Britain for like a few years, like 3-4 years, and then go back to the Caribbean. But where black people set out shop, we stay put, right?
And make it black as hell.
Exactly. But how Britain played it smart was because 1948, in the early parts of July, there was this scheme that was put together by a guy named Iniri Bevan. Iniri Bevan created something called the National Health Service, which is the NHS. Free health service. But how medication is paid for is through the taxes of the public. However, he didn't have enough people to work the system. So when he was calling out for the Caribbean people to come over, he needed the nurses, he needed doctors, and so what. So the people that came over from the Caribbean, they were just like people that just wanted a trip. These were individuals who were working at high class levels and studied abroad. Exactly, right? Man. So the reason why they wanted to do that as well, get the Caribbean people to work on, the trains and the buses and to be doctors and nurses, is because Britain wanted white women to stay at home. So same how you had the redlining program in the States where you got suburban areas where blacks couldn't live in, what they wanted to do is get black people in the Caribbean to come help rebuild the nation whilst white women stayed at home and produced children because they wanted to work and whatnot. So Britain was like, no, white woman, you stay at home. We would get other people to do these jobs and you can produce the children. So what they did, they set up projects just on the outskirts of central London where black people could live in. So when they built these projects of high-rise buildings, we would live at the top. So we can see into central London where everything is, all the riches is, but we can't live there. So how they did it is through the European model. Right. So you live close enough to work in the city, but you can't live.
That's right. America's catching up now, but that's the model. You in Paris, it's the suburbs of Paris. Right. They always put you on, of course, the favelas. I mean, yeah.
So you can see close enough, but you can't work. So by 1961, there was like the population of people in Britain who were born in the Caribbean was like 161,000. But obviously, when Britain put this out to the Caribbean, white people in Britain didn't know what was what was going to happen. So when they see its influx of black people coming in, they're like, "Hold on, what is going on here?" Hey, man. So
Emmanuel Knight in that book, the Pan-African movement, he calls it the boomerang effect. You went out here and colonized these people. You didn't realize they was coming to see you at your house.
Exactly, right. But now here's the trickery, because the question was, how do we build the connections and the relations between the story of the United States and African Americans and black British citizens? Because our stories are very similar. And when I speak to a lot of the brothers and sisters in the United States, they're like, so what's it like in London? Is there black people there? I'm like, the story is crazy because, for example, we had, in the 50s, there was a lot of police brutality, and also there was a lot of racist people who were. Yeah.
I think the first book I read about in the 80s version was a Stuart Hall, Ain't No Black in the Union Jack.
Yeah. Right. So I mean
that comes later, but I mean you laying the foundation for what happens in the 80s. So you saying back in the 50s they ended this thing.
Right. So in the 50s we had obviously the numbers are growing. The Windrush generation is growing. And also what I want to do is share with my brothers and sisters in the States and with you is that the Windrush Empire, they call that the section of when black people from the Caribbean came over. But it's tricky because when we say the Windrush Empire is Caribbean people coming to Britain, white people in Britain associate the ship with black people, when there's a lot of people that came over on a plane. So when we say Windrush Empire, it's a lot. Yeah. So my grandparents, my grandmother's from Barbados. She came over on a plane. So a lot of people, they were bougie. They were flying. Not all they came on the ship.
Right.
So we got to kind of steer away from the British narrative that we came on ships, because it just sounds like colonialism all over again, right? So during the 50s, you had this whole concentration of black people who were building their own sections. So in the 50s and 60s, there was a lot of race riots. So you had someone named Claudia Jones, who was a journalist.
Oh, great, man! I got all Claudia Jones stuff. Oh yeah. Oh yeah, right. No question. Exactly. They put out the United States. No question.
Exactly, right? Do you know what I mean? So we just reminds me of Ida B. Wells a little bit. But she comes over to Britain, and there's a lot of police brutality going on. She starts the first black British newspaper called the West Indian Gazette. And within that, she talks about stories of black British existence.
I wish I could find. Have you seen Carol Boyce Davies' book? It's called Left of Karl Marx. Yes. Right, she's buried in the same graveyard. She left. She's you talking about Marx? If you don't know Claudia Jones, you ain't even hit. Exactly. I'm sorry, but go ahead. So the West Indian Gazette, that's her platform.
Yeah. So she was using that to kind of uplift the black community, because there was no black presence in terms of media. And also there was a lot of deaths by the hands of racist white people, where people, no one went to jail for it. Police that were treating, black people at the time bad. No one went to jail for their treatment as well. So in 1959, she wanted to bring around this unity. So in 1959, she said, you know what? Let's bring around all the cultures in the UK under one roof. And from there we can show that we can work together. Claudia Jones is the reason why we have the carnival. So she created the first carnival in 1959, and then it was picked up in 1966 by a section of people who said, let's make a street carnival. So then Notting Hill Carnival became the biggest carnival outside of Brazil, right?
So
but
you
it was
tell me it's not a movie with Hugh Grant? It's
right? No, it's not.
No, exactly. It's like, come on.
So they gentrified Notting Hill, but Notting Hill was a section where a lot of Caribbean people resided, right?
Yes, sir.
So she worked with someone called John LaRose as well. John LaRose was a guy from Trinidad as well, and he created the first Black British bookstore called New Beacons Books in North London. Right, New Beacons Bookstore housed CLR James Padmore's works. He's created George Padmore Institute there as well. So it was a high concentration during the 60s, because tying it to Black History Month, because you and Karen earlier was talking about Carter G. Woodson, and this was the question about unity, is because the connection between Black British presence and existence and Black power movements in the UK is tied so heavily to United States, is unreal. So we celebrate.
Y'all have that real connection. In fact, New Beacon, I mean, I'm looking around, I have some, but also, what about Bogle Louverture? Because they're the first ones to publish Walter Rodney, right?
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, I got one of them Louverture. Hang on, look, I'm being this. You are dropping so many gems, that connection. But I get the sense, though, if you look for it, that it sounds like you're one of these people. There are people who are doing this Pan-African work there in London. How are y'all making these connections, particularly now with technology? Like what we do,
the reason of the Pan-African movement, because remember in 1945, George Padmore had the 5th Pan-African Congress here in Manchester, and
it was Amy Jakes or Amy Ashwood that was there.
Amy Jakes, Amy Jakes.
Amy Jakes was in, she's sitting next to me. Wow.
Like, wait a minute. After Garvey died, the Pan-African movement was still going on to the level of we celebrate Black History Month here since 1987. The first we celebrate it in October. Where you lot got February, we've got October. And the reason why we have it is because on the 1st of October, a gentleman was invited from the United States to come to County Hall in central London to talk about and to honor, the Black British experience and people in the diaspora and, the works that they've done, right? And this person that came over was Maluga Karenga. Karenga came over to the UK in 1st of October, 1987, but there was a Ghanaian analyst called Akiyaba Adu Sabo, and he was the one who gave birth to the first Black History Month. But if it wasn't for Karenga coming over, we wouldn't have it. For example, in 1963 here, there was a bus boycott. We had our own bus boycott here because they're in Bristol. Bus companies were not hiring Black people. So what did they do? The community in Bristol was like, okay, well, if you're not hiring Black people and Asian people, we ain't going to get on your buses. The bus boycott lasted for 4 months. And Bristol was like, all right, fair enough, because they was losing a lot of money. And also because in the 1960s here, we have something called the Race Relations Act of 1965, which was an act that had to be put forward by the government because there was discrimination against Black people here based upon, literally just on skin color. But what they had signs up in pubs, bars, and hotels that said, no Blacks, no dogs, and no Irish. So United States, where you had coloreds and white only, we had no Blacks, no dogs, and no Irish. And people were abusing it. So then what they did now was create an act that said, no, you can't do that. So white society was like, okay, cool. However, that means even though we can't have no dogs, no Blacks, and no Irish, it doesn't mean that we don't have to employ you. So we're not going to employ you, but we're going to keep our business white. So they had to change that in 1968, and then they came up with the Race Relations Act of 1968, which said, you know what, you can't discriminate based upon color. I mean, the relationship between the UK and US, I mean, we've got just, there was a gentleman.
Can you bring in a little bit of the connection between the UK and South Africa too? Because I know like a lot of the publications, the anti-apartheid stuff is being driven out of the UK. In
Right.
fact, what's the name of the journal? Is it Race and Class? Cedric Robinson.
Oh.
It's writing. I mean, a lot. You probably got one right there. Don't you?
You know what's another book? This one here. It's
You know
called,
what? I just got that one. It just came out.
Right?
Yeah,
So
I just got that.
by Pluto Express. If it was, do you know what? I've got a lot of books, right? But it's because of you and Karen why I start looking at.
Hey, Daryl, you know they just had a sale. That's probably why we both bought that joint, right?
Right, yeah, right. So this book is important because this is like an anthology based upon the Black experience. So it talks about people from South Africa and how, you know, the relationship between Pan-African movement of the Xhosa people and, you know, a lot of the East Africans because, you know, you had someone like this gentleman here who's from Kenya, Wathiango. He was the one that, you know, put forward a lot of decolonizing the African mind and inspired a lot of Pan-Africans in South Africa, as well as one of my favorite books as well was by Chinwezu, the Nigerian.
You know, Chinwezu's still around, man. He just low-key elder in Nigeria. That one right there, that one and his other one with the West and the Rest of Us, those are impossible to find. You got the old copy.
Yeah. But you've inspired me to go to the originals. So you and Karen were talking about going to the first releases and the first publications. I had to get, you know what I mean? And there's a brother in North London who's it's a centre right close to New Beacon's books who was stocking these. So
really?
In the UK. If any books in the UK that you can't get over there, I can send them over to you.
That y'all have. I mean, I remember I was there in 2000. We were there for the 100th anniversary of the first Pan-African Conference, H. Sylvester Williams, and we went to Red Lion Square. And y'all, I mean, the book culture that the Africans in London have created. I found a copy of the big book that was edited on Pan-Africanism from 1850 to like 1975, and I eventually met the brother. He's from the Gambia. He's an ancestor now. His name escapes me. Ideli Langley, J. Ideli Langley. But how is the book culture today? There, I mean, like when those books you're showing, those books are almost impossible to find in the United States, even at the Black places. But is it still a vibrant?
Yeah, but there's a small pocket because the reason there's a small pocket of Pan-Africanists that are still upkeeping, you know, small publications. You know, New Beacons are still thriving and still putting out books, but there's small pockets because remember, tying it back to what I was saying earlier about the 60s, we had to form our own community. So the Saturday schools was alternative to the state schools because they weren't teaching the right history. Within there, we had great speakers come over and pass on their connections to how you can still get these publications. And those people are still around today. You know, some of them are elders, but they still got the connection where we can still publish these books. So we're talking about a generation and a time where a lot of people in the 60s couldn't get banks. So Black people were making money, but we wasn't allowed to open banks. So we had to create a system here in the UK called Partner, which is a Caribbean term saying partner. And what we would do is form a banking system. So for example, let's say me, you and Karen was going to create a partner. What we would do is in the middle of the pot, or you be the banker. So this week I'll give you $20. Karen will give you $20. And then by the following week, that's $40. And then whoever we take it in turns who can take the money. So Karen might say, I need $40 to get whatnot. So she'll take the $40 and then like build.
The collective, no question.
Exactly, which is a West African thing as well. You know what I mean? So when you inspired me, when you spoke about the Bambara, talking about the Jalias and the bloodline and being a storyteller of Griot, when I started to research more than Bambara, they have a system similar to that as well. Yes. So that still goes on today, but it's in small pockets. But you know, it's the book culture is ripe, but it's hard to because I believe in spirituality, which you're talking about. I feel like the longer we, as Caribbean people, the longer we spend time here, we are going to go through a deeper acculturation process. So from the 40s right up until like the early 2000s, we had this, you know, William E. Cross talks about the Negro to Black conversion, right?
Yes, negrescence.
right. So when he talks about that, we had that process because we had small communities that we had to stick together. Now, as our teeth are getting sunken in deeper into British society, where there's small groups of us holding on for dear life, but because of the strong suit of Brexit, it's hard for Black presence to have that presence as we did in the 80s.
Ask you about that, man. What do you think about Brexit? How's
Well,
that going to hit us?
Well, Brexit for Black people is going to hit us because there's certain universal laws that Britain has to follow suit in terms of, you know, identifying race. So same what they did with France, for example, where they've got rid of, when it comes to filling out a census, they got rid of religion and race. So when you're Black French, you're an African French essentially, but in terms of being Black, it's kind of hard to identify that when it comes to census. Same thing that what they're going to do with Brexit. Brexit was modeled via like a MAGA hat. So it was like
that's an important point, Daryl. Help people understand that. This is really an internet. That's where Steve Bannon comes in. This is really an international thing. It ain't at the show, like, because you see what's happening now with Le Pen in France. This right wing, this white nationalist thing is serious. So what do you think? How's this going to unfold in the upcoming months and years?
Because now they've already changed. Well, Brexit's already kicked in. January 1st, they kicked in. So they got rid of the old passports. Our passports are all changed now. It's got a different chip in there, right? So we're not part of the EU. We're not part of the European Union. So within that state now, what it is, it's about trading. So for those who are conservatives, so those who you call the bougie lot who don't really want to get involved with Black struggle, they're the ones who see that the benefit of Brexit is that Britain as a state now, we can make trade with other nations at the rate that we want to do it at. However, they forget that they're Black, right? So what's going to happen is when they start to change certain laws here in Britain, they're going to be affected because it'll be hard to fight racist case. Britain has this covert way of understanding racism, whereas the United States is very overt. So we're fighting racism against racists who know they're racist, but we don't have evidence of racism because it's hard to identify with your Blackness. So what Brexit's going to do now, where there's laws in Europe where you have to follow, Britain has now stepped out of that. So there's certain things that we don't have to follow. So Brexit was modeled as an anti-Black, anti-immigrant, anti-way of having Britain. So it was which is
why they're able to pass it. They're nationalists. So what happens to the demographics though aren't in their favor, right?
It's not, because what's funny is that the same thing that's happening in the United States is happening here in Britain, where the death rate and the birth rate of England is changing. So in the next 20 years, right? But it's changing, right? So, I mean, in Black Britain, we only make up 3% of the population. So we're only just borderline 3 million people. But we make up 14% of the prison population. So marrying it up to the United States, in terms of proportion, there are more Black people in prison here in the UK than there are in the States. But
I suspect do you know how that number breaks down in terms of age? I suspect the younger you go, the higher that percentage gets.
Yes, exactly. Because because a lot of in the 1980s in Britain, you had something called the SUS law, the SUS law. And the SUS law was the police officers can arrest you on the suspicion that you're going to do a crime. You haven't done it yet, but you look suspect, so we can actually arrest you and throw you in jail, right?
Yeah.
And it's based upon something called an 1824 vagrancy law. So same how United States, you've got your vagrancy law, we've got ours. But in the 80s, what they managed to do was manifest that, and the police used that to arrest anybody, and you can get thrown in jail. So you could be in a crowd, just about to cross the road, right, across the street, and you could be standing next to a white person, minding your business, and the police will come to arrest you and say, do you know what? You was about to rob that person next to you. You was about to steal. And he's like, what? I'm actually looking. But they can do that. But obviously it was racially biased. So over 70% of the people arrested were Black. So then Margaret Thatcher, comes from the 80s and the 70s. She was like friends with Ronald Reagan, and right. So
that's the one that destroyed a lot of the Windrush generation records, right? I mean, so now can they even get their benefits? Have y'all fought that war yet? I mean, the way I understand it.
Now you've got the Windrush generation kind of like committee, and they're fighting for a lot of people, but they're doing these secret deportations. So someone likes.
That's what I was hearing. Yeah.
So they're deporting a lot of people back to. So you imagine you've come over 1951 with your parents, right? And you're 3 years old, and you haven't left the UK, but you've come over on your parents' passport. So you've been in the UK this whole entire time. Then you try to file for a certain benefit, but they're like, okay, but we need proof that you are a British citizen.
Right.
But he came over on their passport of their parents. So they're like, I don't have a British passport because of that. They're like, well, if you don't have a British passport, that means you're here illegally. But you're like,
Right.
I've been here longer than you. What are you talking about?
It's like the DACA here, except it's African people.
Exactly.
I ain't mean to interrupt you. So Thatcher then comes in.
Okay.
Right. Exactly.
Oh,
but
no, I just wanted to jump in.
No, that's true. Yeah, because I mean, hey man,
y'all.
Yeah. So my question was to say, sorry, Karen. I know, but how do we, as an African people, unite once again in the modern state that we have? Because we've got the relationship between Africa and the United States. We've got the relationship between the UK. I mean, we had this brother. There's a brother named. I mean, his end story isn't nice, but there's this brother named Michael D. Frita. He was from Trinidad. His mom's from Trinidad and his dad's from Portugal. He came over to UK in '57. He changed his name. So Michael Abdul Malik. He changed his name.
Abdul Malik. Yes.
Right. And he was
friends with actually in the Caribbean. I'm thinking about some. Yeah.
Okay, Michael Abdul Malik. He became a Muslim here, and he joined the Black Power movement that was here because we have Black Panthers here too. Oh, no. And he changed his name to Michael X because he was inspired by Malcolm X because he was friends with his cousin Halik Jamal or something like Hamil Jamal.
He wrote the book From the Dead Level.
Yes,
yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so From the Dead Level. Yeah, that was Malcolm's cousin. Yeah,
right. So remember, Malcolm X came here in '65. He came here on the 12th of February, 1965, 9 days before he was assassinated.
Absolutely. Jan Carew writes about it in his book Ghosts in Our Blood. Because all them cats was hanging out. That's exactly right. In fact, the book I'm thinking about on Michael X, I got in the other room. I have to go get it because they try to make him out like he's straight crazy. They even had him in a James Bond movie. I mean, like a caricature and stuff. Yeah,
exactly right. And then lastly, you had Angela Davis came here in 1974 after she got herself out of prison. She came here to thank because the Black Power movement was strong here.
Oh, no question.
How do we reconcile that movement and that belief and that system in this modern state where we understand that your struggle is my struggle and their struggle is our struggle? How do you feel like in a modern state? How can we do that?
Well, I'll say this very quickly. First of all, brother, this is great. This is a great first conversation. We're gonna be talking a lot. I mean, we gotta make sure you drop your information and things so we can make sure we gotta really get together. We want you come in and talk to some of these students, man.
And before you do, just on the percentage, because there's a lot of conversation in the chat about the percentage of London.
That number being low.
Yeah. That the 44% of London is Black and ethnic minority. What was it? 3%?
Yeah, of the UK or UK population.
The whole entire UK.
Yeah.
Where you're from is the most diverse city.
Yeah,
and it has
40 people fluctuating.
Okay. All right, I want to check. All right,
thank you. No, that's important. Yeah, because like you say, when you say UK, a lot of people don't realize what is that. Wales, England. Say again.
Wales, Scotland, and Ireland as well.
And Ireland, yeah. So I mean that Brexit, it's gonna break up the UK, man. I ain't think the Irish
Scotland don't want any problems with it. They want to
no question. In fact, was it in Googie in something torn and new? He says, if you want to go look at the people they tried to make slaves, it ain't even racial in the sense that the English and the Irish. I mean, Ireland becomes the colony of England. You know what I'm saying? But I think, first of all, thank you, man. This is the beginning of the conversation. Beginning of our conversations, I would say very quickly for everybody who is listening now, and I can't wait now after we get off in a minute to go and look at the conversations that are being had while we're talking in this. This is what it looks like. I mean, this is what it looks like. If you all heard, and I apologize, I'm so excited, man. I'm listening. Daryl is a Jegna. Daryl is a historian. Daryl is living the memory and all the names. That was an entire class in just those few minutes. Everybody from Claudia Jones, we start talking about CLR James or Ras McConnon, we start talking about Michael X. And there are representatives of that tradition who have always operated globally. There are brothers like Edward Scobie. In fact, I think probably the first history of Black Britain I read was Edward Scobie's book, Black Britain. There's a very recent book by a sister, and I probably can't put my hands on it right now. She just wrote a book on the history of Africans in Europe, including heavy work in England. But it starts with that. I think that's what makes our Saturday so unique. It's global. And so I think that's where we begin. I'm sorry we didn't get a chance to ask about those Steve McQueen vignettes that are on Netflix, because there's a strong Pan-Africanist tradition. Like when you heard him talk about Maulana Karenga going there in 1987, there isn't a time in Europe. I also would have loved to hear his opinion on that Netflix documentary, by the way, with those black people in cosplay. But there's not a time. Oh, yeah. Daryl, Daryl, what you think about that Netflix thing, man? That new document with all the black people playing like they're in the royal court.
Oh.
That's all you had to say, brother. Look, we'll pick that up on the other side. You don't need to. I mean, because it's so absurd on his face, right? But I think this is what it looks like, because the tradition you are outlining is unbroken. I mean, like I said, in a second, I got to jump out because I'm going over here to Marcus Garvey Jr.'s 40-day ritual. His father, of course, makes transition in London. And you know the story as well or better than I do, Daryl, of how, Garvey has a stroke and George Padmore writes an obituary for him. And according to Amy Jakes, she's like, that's one of the things that took him completely over the edge. Padmore is writing the obituary of Marcus Garvey, and he's reading the obituary in the paper. Like, no, I'm not dead yet. But England has always had that resistance. And when you mention Malcolm, of course, a generation before Malcolm is a man that Malcolm was listening to when he was in prison in Massachusetts, listening to recordings of Paul Robeson. Paul and Essie literally move and live in England. And of course, there's a famous picture of Paul and Essie Robeson dressed in African clothes with the students of the West African Student Union, WASU. And when Robeson makes Sanders of the River, he insists, and they cast African students who are living in England. Here's a picture of him with Jomo Kenyatta, who's in school at the time. And so I think one thing we can do in 2021 is know that history better and connect to the people who are already doing the work. And you're one of those people, brother. So thank you for this, because we also know that there are folk like all of us all over the globe. And sometimes it's just a matter of connecting. And then once we connect, we share. Because, brother, that was a whole lesson. Look, I got cards and notes now. Sitting here, that's when you see me looking down, I'm scribbling. So we appreciate you.
Thank you. If anybody wanted to get a further understanding and reading, last thing I will say is this: you have to get this book. It's called Back to Black: Retelling.
Brother Kahinde Andrews.
Right. Yeah, Kahinde Andrews. Back to Black: Retelling Black Radicalism for the 21st century. Sorry. And Kahinde Andrews has now become a professor of Black Studies because in 2017, we've now got our first ever Black Studies degree. So we're like 50 years behind. Yeah. So he was in the head of the team. So that's at Birmingham City University. Yeah, Birmingham City University 2017 launched the first ever Black Studies degree in Europe.
Okay. Because when
we are behind, so we're catching up, but we are.
Okay. No. That's good. I mean, in fact, I have that book. I have it, and he did something in another publication that just came out. Look, I'll never be able to find it now, but that's encouraging to hear. I mean, when we were at University College of London, it's a cat named Femi Biko and them, man. I mean, we used to hang with those cats. So I mean, but it's good to know now the next generation that's taking the baton.
Yeah, we're trying.
Well, let me say thank you, because I know Dr. Carr, you have to run.
Yeah, they looking for me in the ritual.
I know. I try to keep you on schedule.
No, you do, but this was too good. That's all right. I'll get there.
Daryl, you'll be back. I appreciate you, and I'm gonna reach out to you all night so that we can have a healthy conversation, and maybe you can teach a lesson one day.
Please.
In here in class. Love you. Thank you, Dr. Carr. And tell the Garveys I said hey.
You know what? I will definitely do that. I'm gonna do that first. And everybody here, we're gonna take all that energy in for our brother, Garvey Jr.
And let me thank everybody. Thank you for the thumbs up, the likes, the subscriptions. And it was somebody, Karen, her name is Karen. Her father, 82 years old. She just signed him up to subscribe. Karen Lynn Hamilton. Her 82-year-old dad, she said, who has low vision, she just subscribed him to this class. So shout out to Mr. Hamilton. Hope that's your name. Mr. 82-year-old Hamilton, and he's loving it, by the way. So
I'm going to stop shouting into this fancy microphone that Karen gave me so you can tolerate it, brother. So
I'm so humble. And I just want to say thank you to everyone. Doc, I love you.
I love you
too. In them streets.
In the street.
Right, have a great weekend.
See you next week.
Okay.